Street Smart Podcast. Today, talking with Tony Frisone, who was gracious enough to fly in from Akron, Ohio to Houston to be a part of this podcast, and that's the only reason he's here.
That's it.
But Tony has a really, really interesting story, and I can't wait to bring it to you guys. I met Tony, met him today for the first time, but met him weeks ago, thanks to Mush Khan, who is previous guest on the show, and he and Mush have some exciting collaborations they're working on at the moment, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But man, Tony, thank you so much for taking the trip down just to chat with me.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is just a conversation about who you are,
sure,
more than anything, and obviously we'll talk about CZAR and all the things that you guys are getting into because that's part of who you are.
Yeah.
But that's not the story. The story is you, and so with that in mind. Man, where were you born? And let's start there.
Yeah, that's a good place to start in the beginning.
It's you have to have that.
So I was born in Akron, Ohio. I'm the oldest of 10 kids.
Good Lord.
Yeah, there's a lot of us. There was never a dull moment in the Frisone household.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, so
Frisone's Italian?
It is.
And you guys are Catholic.
Yeah, exactly.
Hyper-Catholic.
Right, exactly. Hyper-Catholic.
Yeah.
There were so many jokes, right, growing up. My mom would get stopped in the grocery store all the time, and she'd be like, are they all yours? Like, she would get this, like literally every time we'd go out, like, she'd be asked that question. And I think she got, fed up with it. And I remember one time, she made a shirt, and we all put our handprints on it.
Yeah.
And she just had the shirt that just said, "Yes, they're all mine."
Did you do both hands? Because that's a whole lot of handprints.
Well, there wouldn't be enough surface area on the shirt for
maybe
all
a
of
trench
hands.
coat.
Yeah,
you have to do a trench coat.
A trench coat, and maybe the pants too. Yeah, you need them both.
A jumpsuit.
Yeah, a jumpsuit. There you go.
There you go. We go jumpsuit.
So she, best parents, right? Dad started a nonprofit.
Okay.
So that was pretty formative too. Every Wednesday for as long as I can remember, I was volunteering in soup kitchens and clothing centers, homeless shelters, all of that, right? Very formative, very humbling.
And that was his profession.
Yeah, that's what he did, yeah.
So that wasn't just, hey, I do this because I do this. It was, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, he was a director of Catholic Charities in Kent, Ohio.
And you guys are the most Catholic.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of
Is your dad the Pope?
Yeah, close. Yeah, I think it's close. And then he broke off from that and started his own nonprofit, right? Because there's a lot of structural things with Catholic Charities, right? Because it's under, you fall under the whole hierarchy of the Catholic Church,
sure,
right? And
sure.
There's good that can be done in the world that, obviously that's not just, it falls in line with the Catholic Church and that kind of chain of command, right?
Yeah.
So he broke off from that and started his own family and community services. And then he's just grown that to unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable heights, right? So, started...
and changed so many lives.
Yeah, thousands, right? Anytime, I think he's kind of being a dick, I just remember.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He's literally responsible for saving thousands of people's lives.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that's cool to have as a dad. Yeah.
Yeah. So he gets a dickish pass.
Yeah.
From
there's a pass. Yeah. There's a little bit of a pass that you can that you I think you have
some grace.
Yeah, some grace. And he's just he's like an animal because if he didn't go the nonprofit route, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars for a company that he would have built, right?
Sure.
Because the building process, whether you're doing it in kind of the traditional startup for-profit route or you go the non-for-profit route, I think a lot of those skills are transferable. Right?
I think so. I mean, you're building a business, right?
You're building a business.
You're building a brand, whether you're doing it, in a benevolent benevolent reasons or for, to make a profit.
Totally.
So it makes sense.
And I think the fundamental, we talked a little bit before about, I think we need to do a better job, as a society, to have good answers to basic questions, right? And this applies for everything. But when you talk about what is the purpose of a business, and that could be again a for-profit startup or a non-for-profit. And I think fundamentally it's to add value, right?
Right.
You gotta add value. Now that value can be measured in dollars. There's a lot of other ways that you can value it. But if you're good at doing a thing, it's going to be apparent that you're good at doing a thing, whether that your ability to raise, venture dollars, investment dollars, or your ability to, generate a lot of profit, or your ability to raise a lot of grants in a nonprofit sector. If you're good at doing a thing and adding a value, that'll come out.
Right.
More likely than not, right?
Right.
So that's kind of dad. It's not fully dad, but that's kind of dad. And then mom, in addition to having 10 kids,
I was going to say,
also a nurse.
Mom was busy.
Mom was busy.
And she was a nurse.
And she homeschooled us to like high school.
My God, man.
Yeah, no, like there's like you like absolute savage.
I have zero work ethic now. My work ethic has been called into question.
I mean, she just like not only like a phenomenal woman and human being in general, but also extremely formative. So she adopted my older brother. They were foster parents while she was pregnant with me, and then adopted Angelo, and then had me, and then adopted Angelo, and then.
Was his name Angelo before he was adopted?
No. I don't. They got him like so. His Angelo's parents were schizophrenic drug addicts, right?
Oh, wow.
So you imagine like that concoction,
Sure.
right, in a kid, and so that was something that when he's growing up, a lot of learning disabilities, and she
just challenges from the
totally,
jump.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
Not none of it obviously his fault, right? Literally inherited, and so. She made the decision, I think right around, after first grade for him, like, hey, he needs like a little bit more like directed, like one-on-one, focus as far as education is concerned. And then she said, all right, we're going to homeschool you and your brother. And then she ended up doing that for me until high school, right? That was like the jump off point. And there was a good, there's I don't want to piss people off, but like the homeschool crowd can be a really weird crowd, right?
Yep.
Really weird, socially awkward, like weird beliefs and all kinds of weird stuff. That wasn't really our reality because, we played a lot of sports. We had a lot of, there were other avenues for socialization.
When I was you're a little younger than me by a lot. And so then when I was a kid, the homeschool, there weren't those options for them.
Right. Yeah.
And so now there are actual mechanisms in place that they can be sort of playing mainstream sports
Totally.
and playing against other high schools
Totally.
and things like that. And they have their proms and they
Totally.
have a fairly normal experience. So that's great. I think that's great that they've done that because some of those things are very important to have. They help you figure out how to navigate the world.
Yes.
And if you're sort of in that bubble,
Yes.
You don't get that experience.
Totally.
And you can't then translate that into real life at some point.
And I think, so the pluses and minuses with like a normal school route is you absolutely have that socialization piece, just like a bunch of awkward kids trying to figure out how to do human, right? But I think the thing that it's really, really bad and like the opposite of like a natural transition is the school schedule, both in turn like periods, like throughout the day, and then like how the year and how the progression of grades is done. I think is like really dumb, right? So like part of the thing that we did, and part of what I think homeschooling does in general, is if you can solve the socialization side of it through sports and other ways,
Sure.
and it's like you said, it's like so easy now compared to
it is now,
100 years ago when my mom tried to do it.
First of all, you're not 100 years younger than me. Close, but
Close.
but yeah, they've made some strides there for sure.
Yeah, and like,
But if you can solve the socialization side,
then like a lot of how I'm wired mentally, and I think this lends itself to entrepreneurship as well, is like there was, first of all, I was in, high school history when I was in probably 6th grade, right? Just so it's like you can ratchet up or down all of the subject areas depending on your capabilities, and also like there's a fixed amount of stuff to do or learn in a day, and so like you want to get your ass up at 6 a.m. and start your school day and get done early
and be done early.
You're going to be done at noon. Go. Right? If you want to drag your ass, not only to start, but to drag your ass throughout the day, and it's 5 p.m. and you still have shit to do.
Well, you still have shit to do.
Enjoy.
Yeah.
Right? And so you can. It doesn't take a huge like leap to realize. I'm kind of a little bit empowered to like do this differently. Right?
Sure. And that's what. That's what my day is.
Yeah.
If you want to start early.
Right.
If you don't.
Yes.
But hey, you still have this much to do today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so like I think like that part is really damaging in the traditional school, right? Because it doesn't. you can be a rock star, right? But you're probably going to like skip, maybe you skip a grade. But you got to be good pretty much across the board. And then there's also some weirdnesses. That's where I think socialization hurts you, is like, you see some like really geniuses skip a couple grades, and now they're like, they're 12 years old flying with 14-year-olds, right? So there's like this biological weirdness that happens that's not probably a great thing.
And what's interesting too is it's that to that point, in those years, like 2 years difference is not a big difference in my age group.
Totally.
And how old did you say you're?
31.
31. So you and I are, what is that, 15 years apart?
And it's like nothing.
It's not a big difference.
Sure.
2 years?
Yeah.
From 14 to 16?
Crazy.
Huge difference. 16 to 18? Huge difference.
Crazy.
And so it really is magnified at that age group.
Yeah. So I think the way we did it, not to just say like, that's the way to do it because we did it. I think the way Mom rolled that out was like really smart, because it was always like understood that high school was going to be normal high school, right? And so, I was doing high school level stuff probably end of, senior year high school level, certain subjects.
Oh, so you're saying you guys did, I misunderstood that.
Yeah.
You guys went homeschool up to
high school,
ninth grade, and
right.
then you went
Correct.
into actual
Correct.
high school.
Yes.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. And so I like that was like a really
I think that's
effective
a great
balance.
idea. Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Because the other thing I think homeschooling does is, again, there's 100 ways to mess it up, like everything in life. But one of the other cool things it does is it allows you to be you organically, right? Like there's no influence. Like I wasn't like, there was never a point where I'm like keeping up with the Joneses and I'm bugging Mom to like get me some new toy or new shoe or something. Cause it's just like, I don't give a shit. Like I'm just with, my brothers and sisters, like, it doesn't matter. And so like, but by the time you roll into high school where those things are like amplified,
They're
I
less
don't give a
important.
shit. I don't care at all. Right. And like in that absolutely had an effect. Like that radiates to other people when you see somebody who's just like and not just like emo, like I don't give a it's like someone who legitimately is like, yeah, I could, like I don't care what genes you have,
right?
It doesn't make you a better person. It doesn't like I don't care, and that I think is infectious to like not care in that way, and so like you couple these experiences with some really close personal relationships that you develop. Working a lot in the nonprofit world, right? Where because you get to know the people that you serve.
Oh, sure.
And you realize that, but for the grace of God, there go I, right? Like you realize that and it's a terrifying thing. I understand why people don't do it or don't like to do it, because what you realize is that the delta, like the difference between someone who's homeless and alcoholic, is the difference of their family, Roger's wife and daughters dying in a car accident, not because he was drinking, like before he was drinking.
Sure.
Right. So like you realize like totally good guy, normal dude, family dies in car accident, triggers alcoholism, triggers job loss, triggers homelessness, and then you're helping to feed him in a soup kitchen.
Yeah, and he'll never. It'll be a challenge for him to ever get back to a normal existence.
Totally, because there's mental damage, there's chemical damage, then there's all of the that lifestyle is a rough lifestyle.
Sure.
You got to do some things that aren't great for money, and all of those build on one another. So once you fall off the track, you're kind of stuck for It's very hard to your point. It's very hard to get back on the right track. Not impossible, but it's hard. And so you realize like, well, was this guy evil? No, he's just a normal guy whose wife and daughter died in a car accident.
He's just a normal guy that fell off.
Yeah, and it's like and he fell off not even because. He had a moment of moral weakness or something. He just fell off because horrible shit happened to his family.
Right.
And so like you can't go through, like you can't have a lot of those experiences, I think, in formative years, and be like super arrogant about anything. Like, 'cause you realize that the it's so thin.
Yeah, and I do think it's important in those years for you for kids to see those things.
Totally.
And we volunteered with our church a bit and went and worked in homeless areas and those types of things. And my kids went with me, and they were scared. I mean, those people can be very scary.
Sure. Absolutely. Because you have mental illness, you've got drug use, you've got a whole bunch of stuff.
You just never know. And,
totally.
And it's I always likened it to being in a room with like a trained tiger.
Yeah.
Because probably everything's going to be okay.
Right.
But if it's not okay, there's going to be a real problem.
Yes.
But they've seen those things, and they know, oh wow, that can happen. And then you sit down, and you have a conversation with them, and some of them are very articulate,
Sure.
and they've just had a rough go of it
Yeah.
for some reason.
Yeah.
So I do think that you're exactly right. It
Yeah.
is formative, and that's interesting that your father had that nonprofit, and I can't wait to hear how that influenced
Yeah.
who you are today.
Sure.
Obviously, so.
Yeah.
But so you grew up in Akron.
Yep.
Homeschooled.
Yep. Till high school.
Till high school.
Then there was, got to make the decision where to go to high school.
Mm-hmm.
It was a private high school, Hoban in Akron, and money on a partial nurse salary, nonprofit startup was not a lot, and a ton of kids was not a lot,
Right,
a lot of money. But I got a full ride to the private high school, and that kind of kicked off that route. I joke with my parents that between homeschooling, a full ride to a private high school, and then Army ROTC to college, like it was virtually nothing to educate me, right? Like all through, and Army paid for my master's right on top of that. So very little money actually spent in in education. But those were great years. Like the high school years were awesome. Wrestling, football, student council president, all of that stuffs. And then you kind of have another awakening where it's time to go to college,
Sure.
or at least have that decision if you're going to college or not.
Right. And you did ROTC all 4 years of high school?
So nothing in high school.
Oh, gotcha.
Right around junior year, I remember like thinking to myself, do I want to go to college?
Yeah.
And if the answer to that question is yes, there is zero mommy and daddy money coming
Right.
to pay for that.
Right.
Right. So I need to either go athletic, academic, which was highly unlikely, or some other route, right? Military route. One of my uncles was in the Army, and that's kind of where I looked at, okay, well, what does this, ROTC for college look like, right? And then it looks pretty good, right? They pay all of your tuition, pay for your room and board, pay for a little bit of a stipend, and then you graduate with a guaranteed job, effectively, right?
Sure.
On the back end. That sounds pretty good.
It doesn't sound bad.
Yeah, it certainly sounded great. Like when I was 18, like when I graduated high school and left home, we slept 3 to a room, right? So it was myself and my younger brother on the bottom bunk and another younger brother on the top bunk, right? Like and so you imagine the transition to college,
Yeah.
right?
You have your own bed.
Own bed, and like you have these weird experiences with other people in the dorm or whatever, where they're like, "Did you play my Xbox?" And it's like, "The fuck you mean yours?" Like,
Yeah.
I'd be lucky not to share a toothbrush. Like, what are you talking?
That's a community Xbox,
Yeah, like,
and you know that.
What are you talking about? Right? It's
Right,
like
right.
I was an 18-year-old dude sharing a bedroom with small bedroom with 2 other people.
Sure.
Everything was kind of shared. There was no like the concept of like mine was like not a thing, right?
Yeah.
In anything, like in literally anything. So, like there was like some funny experiences like that where there was like a little recalibration. But yeah, then Xavier. So I went to school in Cincinnati at Xavier. And that was pretty awesome. I got to study abroad in Barcelona for about 6 months, and then went off to do Army stuff.
So this happened when I interviewed Mush. I think they're motion lights.
Oh yeah.
So you gotta
move around. There we
you
go.
go.
Oh, that was
Yeah.
not a lot of movement.
Well, you take up more space than me.
Yeah. So after Xavier, it was the Army, and that was a whole separate adventure.
Awesome. So you graduated Xavier with what?
Business degree. Had an international business focus. Something I was very interested in is like this intersection between, again, kind of doing things that add value and getting compensated for it, and then how do you play that with what other folks in other parts of the world are doing, right? Both like
Right.
what are the ideas and what are like the organizational structures that you can apply to other parts and cultures, and then what are the things that they're doing that you can apply here, right?
Right. So you're looking for through lines.
That's exactly right.
Internationally.
That's exactly right. And so, because there's even like what people don't, I think, appreciate. So I would encourage everyone to spend like a pretty decent amount of time abroad. And I think the lessons one learns from that experience is, I think, the opposite of what one might think, right? Like a school of thought says, America sucks, so leave, and you get to experience how much America sucks by how awesome these other places are, and then you can come back and either bitch about America or, help change it. And like, it's the opposite of that.
Correct.
Right? You realize how awesome this country is.
Yep.
The more time you spend literally in any other place. I mean, I've been after the Army, I've been to a lot of places.
Some friendly, some not.
Some friendly, some
we'll
not.
We'll get into that, but.
And it doesn't matter if it's, Europe, countries in Europe or Afghanistan. America kicks ass.
It does.
In so many ways.
I've been very fortunate, too, to travel the world some. My mother owned a travel agency when I was a kid, back when that was a thing.
That's awesome.
When that was
so
an
cool.
absolute necessary thing.
That's so cool.
And so we got to go overseas and travel these places. And you're like, this place is historically cool. Never want to live here.
Ever.
Ever. I can't wait to go back to America and talk about the things I saw over here.
Sure.
But this is cool for a bit.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. This is cool to pass through. But if you told me, and I don't care, like you could say like, Spain and France and Italy, like, nope.
Yeah.
Not to live.
Yeah. So my wife, she was stationed in Ramstein.
Yeah.
And she says, that was great. I loved being in Germany and stationed there. But 2 years was enough.
Yeah, exactly.
And we go visit if we want to, but we live in America.
Yeah.
And then more exclusively, we live in Texas, and we're working on you.
Yeah.
We'll get you down here permanently.
It might happen sooner rather than later. This is a pretty amazing place. So like that, I think I would highly encourage anyone, right, regardless of your walk of life or regardless of what you want to do with your life, you need to have this this appreciation for where you live, right? Or you need to live elsewhere, right? Like
there's a reason the rest of the world is wanting to come here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that, and again, not without our challenges and things like that.
Totally.
Anytime you have 330 million people in one place, you're going to have some stuff to work through.
Yeah.
Or even 10 people in one place. You've got to navigate that.
You have to navigate that. Exactly right.
But it doesn't mean that what we got going on is worse than.
No.
It's not the best in the world still.
Right.
So.
Right. Exactly right. And it's you need to have a little bit. I think what rubs people the wrong way sometimes is you need to have a little bit of democracy is messy, right? And a lot of people is very, very messy.
Well, our system is set up to be messy and awful.
So thank you. So what a lot of people don't understand is you don't set up a government with checks and balances and here's the Senate and here's the House and here's the executive branch and here's the judiciary. You don't set up that government if you want it to work fast or even work at all, right?
Yeah, I don't know that they really wanted it to work. If everything's aligned, it's monarchy.
Yeah. So it's designed
frankly.
to not do things, right? So I laugh when, people are complaining about how hard it is to get something done in Washington. It's it was never Washington was never designed.
It's supposed to.
Yeah. It was supposed to, everything was supposed to be under, right? It was under the federal level. What are the states doing? What is your city doing? What are you doing? What's your community and what's your house doing? It's an individual level. I think that was another takeaway from the Army was you're responsible for you. And then if you have a problem that you can't solve, then you go one level up. And then both of you should be able to solve it, right? So a platoon setup, right? You've got an individual soldier, and if he can't solve it, maybe his battle buddy can help him. And if they can't solve it, their team leader. And if they can't solve it, their squad leader. And if they can't solve it, their platoon sergeant. And if he can't solve it, then he can solve anything. Then the platoon leader, right? And there's not this, there shouldn't be this, I never thought about solving it for myself. I'm sure I'm going to go right to the top.
Right.
And I think that's an appropriate way of thinking about how to build society, how to take responsibility. You got to take it yourself first. Try to solve it at the lowest level possible.
Right.
Because it's just it's more effective, it's more efficient to do it that way.
If I don't have to involve someone else, I'm not gonna.
Sure.
I mean, it just not only because I know. I always have the tendency to feel man, it'll take me longer to explain them how I want it done than I just do it.
Sure.
Now that does have diminishing returns at some point.
Right.
But in the beginning, it's definitely worthwhile to go, I'm going to figure out all of the trappings.
Yes.
And that way, when I do have someone else working that, and they do hit one of those things, I know how to tell them to solve it quickly, and we can keep moving.
That's exactly right. And I think this might sound a little weird. We don't really live in America, right? We really live where do we spend our time is in our city and even maybe even like in a neighborhood or like a smaller community subset of that city. Like that's where we live, that's where we wake up, that's where we eat, that's where we go to work, that's where our kids go to school, right? That's where we go to the park. Like that's where we do the living.
Right.
And so like that's where we spend the vast majority of our life, is not like in the country and all of what that means. It's really small. It's really on like an individual and community basis is from where most of the living happens. And I think the emphasis is completely flipped, right? Where there's like a lot of, and there's reasons for this, right? But a lot of the emphasis is on national stuff, federal level stuff. And
I think that also has to do sometimes with what state you live in too.
Totally.
Because Texas is very self-reliant type of mentality.
Absolutely.
And I've not spent much time in Ohio, but you know, it seems like the cities and the states that are on the coast are very, you know, federally minded.
Sure.
And again, that's another thing that's in my mind beautiful about America.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I wouldn't want to live anywhere but Texas, just because first of all, I'm sixth generation Texan, so it's just sort of in me. But at the same time, man, that self-reliance, I think that it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you have self-reliance, you can be successful at some level. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and the beauty of the system that we have nationally is that it's really just this bag of 50 petri dishes, and it needs to stay that way, right? Because it's part of what makes our country so awesome and so resilient is like you can do something in your state, and I can do something very different in my state, and then maybe your idea works and mine fails, and then I'll adopt your idea, and then that good idea will spread. But if we're all the same, then
what if you're all the same with a bad idea?
Exactly right.
It goes real bad.
It goes real bad, real fast. And in a country that is, you know, this size, and that's the other thing, right? Like from an engineering mindset, right? You know, big things are complicated. You know, I hate to break it to a lot of people, but size does matter, right? And if you have 330 million people, like that's a lot of humans, and a lot of, you know, a tremendous amount of
individual interests.
Absolutely, right? Individual interests and wiring and cultures and all of this is all coming together. Look, that's chaotic, and if you're not okay with a little bit of that chaos and you know how it manifests itself is not always clean, right? Like there's some riots, right? Like there's like some things that happen.
Yeah, but there are also riots everywhere.
That's right.
It doesn't matter if they're, you know, I mean, even down to like individual companies will have riots.
Sure.
I mean, they'll have
internal
conflict like that. So, you know, riots. Again, that sort of sensibility is healthy on some level.
Absolutely, it is.
But you can't just tear the world down doing it. I mean, I get it.
Yeah, it's like a pressure release, right? It's like a pressure cooker where if you see these little kind of pockets of resistance or rioting or you know, civil unrest, you know, I kind of celebrate those things a little bit, because if it's happening, it's real, right? So you should know that it's real, because if there's not an outlet for that, and if that is internalized and pushed underground, like that can manifest itself in a whole lot of, you know, pretty nasty, horrible ways. So every time like there's a little bit of some pressure cooker, like that's kind of a relief to me, because some of the steam's getting let out of the system. But what I think is so awesome about America is it comes back, right? Like something that is so boring that I think is so, you know, like a lot of the American population thinks is so boring, that I think is like a miracle every time it happens, is the peaceful transfer of power from like the president.
Right. He just gives it. He gets in a helicopter and flies away, and the next guy starts.
I mean, and it's like, and I campaign against you for a year or two.
Yeah.
I hate your guts.
Yeah, absolutely hate it. It's not fake.
No, it's not fake. I absolutely hate you. And then, go ahead. You know, and like the military reports to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, the Homeland Security reports to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you really wanted to, you could get real saucy with it.
Yeah, and then you just beat me, and I could say no.
Yeah, no.
And so, like the fact that we can still do this is unbelievable. Because there's like, I mean, there's billions of dollars of, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that's.
I need you to move again.
Yeah,
there you go.
There's all kinds of stuff, you know, money and emotion and all of these things tied up to elections, and to just, well, guys.
Yeah, we gave it our best shot.
We gave it our best shot, and now I'm out. Is truly incredible, because that's That's not the norm.
Well, that's not how it happens in the rest of the world, generally speaking.
And it's certainly not what happens in like human history's perspective.
Oh, no.
It's a very rare thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. And I think that's one thing that makes America, has made us as successful as we are, is that we do have room for not only, releasing that pressure.
Totally.
But then coming back together, even if it's like we're back together and I still hate you and you hate me and I don't like who's in the office and whatever.
Right.
But I'm just going to go back to doing what I was doing, and then we'll try again in 4 years or 2 years or whatever.
Yes.
It is amazing. So, and you're right. Unless you go and you travel, you're not going to have that perspective.
No.
I find it always interesting when I meet people, and it's unfortunate that some people just don't have the ability to do it, that have never been on an airplane, never been out of maybe even out of the town they live in,
Yeah.
But that perspective is extremely important. And so you not only got that perspective in school overseas in Barcelona, but then you joined the Army.
Yeah.
So you joined the Army.
Yeah.
And tell me about that.
Yeah. So I commissioned as an engineer officer. So, Army engineers, they do a lot of stuff. There's that's like a huge umbrella. You've got the combat engineer side, blow stuff up, mine stuff, right? And then you also have this construction side of the house, and that's both like tactical construction, and that's also like big boy national infrastructure,
right?
U.S. Corps of Engineers, level. And so like that creator and destroyer element really excited me, right? Because I've got a pretty small attention span. So
the creating side's cool.
Yeah,
but then blowing stuff up's cool.
Yeah, it's super cool, right? And then to be able to not pick. And to have that all under one umbrella,
I can do all of that. I can build it and then blow it up.
Yeah,
that's
let's
great.
do all of that. So that appealed to me. I just felt like if I went that route for as long as I was in the Army, I could have fun.
Now, how long were you in?
8 years.
8 years.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So went to train in Missouri, which is like another kind of part of all of this is. I got to see not only a lot of the world, but a lot of America. Right. So like my deep appreciation for this country. Comes from a lot from like living in a lot of the country, right? And realizing that, you got friends in pockets all over the country. So, did training in Missouri. Then first real duty station was out in Fort Lewis, JBLM, Joint Base Lewis McChord, out in Washington State. Okay. Just south of Tacoma. And like that's a whole, like the Pacific Northwest of this country is like a whole different thing.
It really is, but it's absolutely beautiful.
Oh, it's amazing. It's
so pretty. But to your point, though, and I'm the same in oil and gas. I've had the opportunity to travel around the country, in different places, and you meet people, and you're like, well, these people are absolutely different than me. Yeah. And then you're also like, but they're also the same people. Yeah. Everyone has the same interests, the same thing, and I do think that is very important. Also, is to understand that as disconnected as we can feel, we're still. All of us have got basically the same interests at heart.
Yeah, and that's where I think like if the focus is more on individual choices and community, like there's so much more alignment. Like could be arguably near unanimous agreement on like how we do things where we spend most of the time living. Right. And we don't have to argue about like national abortion policy. Right. If it's about like, hey, do we all agree that we don't want potholes on our roads? Yeah. Okay, cool. We all agree that we want our kids to have a good education? Yep. Yeah, awesome. Cool, right? So like that kind of thing we can get like nearly 100% agreement on at the local level. And if we spend if we spend a lot of our energy focusing on where we do most of our living, you don't get, divided by this national stuff.
What's funny about that is, if I'm talking to somebody that doesn't live in the area here in Houston, and they say, where do you live? I'll tell them I live in Houston, just because it's a big landmark. That's where I live. Actually, the town I live in is closer to Huntsville than it is Houston. Right. I live in Conroe. And it's funny because people go, oh, man, my conservative friends will say, the politics in Houston, I couldn't get with that. I'm like, they don't affect me. Right. My town, Montgomery County, is extremely conservative. Yeah. And so when Houston's doing all these things that you might not agree with, we're doing none of those things. Because we don't have to.
Right. And that's where you live, and that's what matters.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
So I went out to Fort Lewis, just fell in love. The nature there, the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest is unbelievable. I mean, you've got a rainforest there, you've got mountains, you've got just a tremendous amount of green and water and coast. I mean, phenomenal. And so I went to Afghanistan pretty shortly after showing up there. So the job was, again, one of these many things that engineers do, route clearance, which is really just like a fancy way of saying driving really slow down a road and trying not to get blown up, right? Finding IEDs ideally before they go off.
That helps.
Yeah, that helps. It helps for all parties involved, maybe with the exception of the people that are putting them in.
I was going to say that maybe one interested party that it's not so great for. Screw those guys.
Yeah, screw those guys. So I was in northern Afghanistan out of Mazar-e Sharif. Again, like one of these situations where, I saw a lot of kind of messed up stuff and I saw a lot of like amazing stuff. Mm-hmm. Afghanistan's a beautiful place. You don't hear a lot of people say that, but it's like a beautiful place. So many of the people over there are just the best people on earth, and they have great food. So like that's how I judge a culture or a city is based on their food, and they've got phenomenal food. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my buddies, I have lots of friends that have served and have been to Afghanistan and other places. Yeah. And they talk about one of the things that struck them was you would walk into a village and you'd look around and you're like, okay, well, there's a guy over there working on his car and his wife's in there cooking and his kid's playing soccer in the front yard. And, they're just doing life. And
they're living llocally like all of us. Like this is kind of circling it back. Is like, this is a thing.
Right. And then his point further was when you hear people say, when these warlords and whatever are coming in and just wrecking shop. Yeah. And they're like, well, they just leave. You're like, would you?
Right.
That's your home.
Totally.
And the answer to that is no.
No.
You wouldn't.
No.
You'd stay and be defiant.
Sure.
And and so that always struck me as interesting because I've not obviously spent time in that type of an arena, but to hear him say that and others as well, these people are just people.
Sure.
For the most part.
Yeah, just people trying to get by, like literally, like any of us trying to get by. Like the things that matter when you're at the living end of the spectrum, they're just remarkable similarities. And so like that experience was there's a lot to that, right? But one of them was, here you are, you're like this 22-year-old guy, and you just inherit all of this like insane amount of responsibility of both like of dollars and equipment and people's lives.
Right.
And everyone acts like it's what should happen, and then you just be like, all right, like this is normal, right?
Well, you didn't go to Xavier.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Here, we're gonna entrust you with a whole bunch of.
This kid went to Xavier. Give him all that stuff.
Give him all of the stuff. So like this was crazy, right? Because you had this basically freshly minted second lieutenant, and then the way that we did things in RC North was we had the engineers up front clearing routes, right, and then we had a company like a huge element of German infantry, and then we'd have like an air weapons team or like a drone overhead, right? Mm-hmm. So like little old me, was a Carco combined arms route clearance commander, right? And so, every night we would move with the ass that was, greater than, some country's entire defense department, right? Like, right. And I'm like nobody. Like I'm just like a dude.
Right, that's just your group.
Yeah, that's just me, just doing my little weird thing in the mountains. And so like that was again like one of many surreal experiences in the Army where you realize that like nobody was like, oh, this is a lot of money, this is a lot of responsibility. Yeah, you've got a lot of people's lives.
Don't fuck this up.
Don't fuck this up. It was just like, yeah, this is yours.
And
deuces.
Go. Yeah, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah. And so that's really where you
did you realize it in that time that it was just an oddity, or were you like, well, of course this is what I'm doing?
That's a great question. No, I think it was of course. Because I think I've always been primed to like with a bias towards action. So I think like not having, and the Army's really weird, it's like schizophrenically weird about this. When you're home, you're wrapped in bubble wrap and neon signs are put around, like they're terrified of anything going sideways when you're here.
Yep.
A lot of people have been relieved, like I could tell you horror stories all day long of like ridiculous Army bureaucracy domestically. But then when you're deployed, all of that comes off.
Yeah.
And there's a degree of autonomy that you could never get stateside, that you get in like a legitimately more dangerous environment.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like they take a lot of that nonsense, and of course there's a whole heaping pile of bureaucracy and nonsense even in the deployed environment, but it is very different, and because you're just expected to operate, right? Like, man, figure it out, guy, and then bring all your guys home, do a job, and then bring your guys home.
Right.
So, I mean, that was extremely, formative, because what you realize is and I got it really close. I think probably, closer than what's normal with, that officer or platoon leader with the I legitimately love my guys, right?
Sure.
And so, you get really close to them and you realize you almost can't think about it. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it because, if something happened to them, you'd be crushed.
You'd never be able to recover.
Yeah. Especially, but I think that does fuel there were a few times where it was like, look, dude, it's fucking 3 a.m. Like, I can just go to bed and do I need to plan the whole route? And it's like, yeah, you do.
Right, you do. Yeah,
you do.
Yeah, because the second that you don't is the time someone gets hurt.
That's exactly right.
And then you're like,
and I knew I couldn't. I knew I couldn't.
That's on me.
Right. If I went to bed or whatever, even if it was a suck fest of a day and it was super late. And nothing ever happens in this part of the route.
Right.
Forget it. Right. Like I knew I physically could not step away because I knew
because who else knows nothing ever happens in that part of the route?
Yeah.
The people that want something to happen
exactly
in that part of the route.
Yeah. Exactly. So that was extremely kind of formative, and there were so many lessons. I was absolutely blessed with a badass, old school platoon sergeant, right? The perfect person to pair, me, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, a lot of energy with just classic curmudgeon platoon sergeant, right?
Right.
Experience out the ass, chain smoking,
well,
just
of course.
extremely knowledgeable.
Made of shoe leather.
Yeah. Literally operated off of caffeine and nicotine exclusively. I don't know. I was with the guy for 9 months in Afghanistan, and then a bunch more when we got back. I don't know if I ever saw him eat food, and I also don't know if I saw him drink water. It was
overrated.
It was tobacco and coffee.
Yeah. So my wife talks about that in the Air Force. To get these guys, and they call them butter bars.
Yeah.
And she's like, you'd have some that were very successful,
Sure.
and those guys came in and they had what you're describing, and sort of in the beginning, it's sort of a love-hate relationship, but
totally.
at the same time, the guy that is the person you're describing, sure. the person in your
sure.
position
sure.
recognizes, hey man, I'm not going to be successul without that guy.
Totally.
And then the ones that were completely unsuccessful rolled in like they knew everything.
Yeah, and they're absolutely, and I understand very deeply what happens there, right? So I think culturally, and whether this is shared experience, organically, or whether this is depicted in the media, right? There's an absolute tendency to default towards idiot, lost, LT, butter bar, douchebag, right?
Yep.
And that certainly exists, right? I'm not denying that at all. But I think what happens, and there is this an initial love-hate sniff test, is because the platoon sergeant is trying, who's the OG, is trying to make sure that everything is done sensibly, and he has to take in guys and gals who might want to rock the boat.
Right.
Now sometimes the boat needs to be rocked.
Right.
And so there's going to be a clash, and it's just there's just natural personality, calibrations that need to occur, right? So there's absolutely a lot of things there. But I think what a lot of folks miss about the idiot douchebag lost LT thing is you can spend a whole lot of time in the Army and not ever hold a real leadership position, right? You can come in as a private, and you're barely responsible for yourself. And then, you do a couple years and, you're a specialist, and then you're a sergeant and maybe a team leader. Right. But that's, 4 people.
Yeah.
That's not a lot. And so what you realize is, by the time you're at the point where you're at even just the platoon level, which from an officer is literally the starting block.
Sure.
You might have 10, 15 years. Right. And the officer is starting there.
Yeah.
Right. And so, there's going to be a little bit of learning curve. Sure. but like there's you're lost all the time or whatever, and it's like, well, you've never led anyone doing anything. You've never had to make a decision. So like, yeah, it's easy to poke fun at the person who screws up, but it's like none of you are responsible for anything.
Yeah, and what you're describing is a guy that's taken 15 years to get to a place and a guy that's starting at that place. Well, both of you are starting at that place. Because he's never been there before either.
Right.
But there is a certain amount of, built-in respect that guy gets for grinding that out for 15 years. So you got to work with it. And I think that'll translate absolutely when you are leading people in business.
Sure.
Because you're going to have people that come in that maybe know more than you in the field that you're in, but it might be your company.
Yeah.
And you've got to figure out how to get your vision across in a way that's not going to be destructive to that person.
That's exactly right. And I think this is particularly true in tech, where you've got this weird situation where you could have like a 17-year-old, just whiz kid.
Just savant of a kid, yeah.
Exactly. And there's there are a lot of people, but there are not a whole lot of people that would, push $100 million towards a 17-year-old, right? So you need to have that balance of the team where you've got that gray beard, right?
Executive blonde is what I call it.
Executive blonde.
I've got it, it's executive blonde.
You've got to have that combo, right?
Sure.
And so, because the other thing what people don't understand is like the problem of how to do war good. There's a lot, right? Like that takes a lot to perform combined arms combat operations well. Right? That's very difficult to do, as we're seeing is like on display in Ukraine right now.
Sure.
Like here was the spooky menace of Russia, and people were talking about they might even they're harder than America. Like they might be able to beat. They got their shit rocked, right? And they couldn't they couldn't even pull off a dramatic invasion or occupation of a neighbor.
Correct.
The fuck come at me with like combat, projecting combat power, right? So like, you can see like when you don't have the combined arms, right? The infantry and armor and artillery and engineers and military intelligence and logistics and air power and like the more pieces you add to that, if you can make it work well, the more lethal and effective you are.
Correct.
But it's very hard to make that work well. And so with the Army, one of the problems with the Army is like, how do you optimize for both large organizations and like large formational movements, but then also not have a bunch of like high-level eggheads who don't know how to actually like shoot a gun, right? Like they don't know how to actually do anything.
Right.
And the flip side is, and I think the bias, because it's cool, way cooler, is the bias is towards like trigger pullers. Mm-hmm. And so, the opposite school of thought is, just start everybody from level 1. But then you're like 70 years old if you do that organically by the time you can actually take over anything real, right? Like if you're 10 or 15 years, by the time you get to a platoon, that's a starting level, right?
Well, you're also failing to recognize that some people just have an inborn ability to do certain things.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Some people are born to be leaders.
Yes.
Other people are born to not be leaders. Yeah. And if you can put people in the position that they're most apt to be successful in, well, then everyone's more successful as a result.
Yes. And like there are people like I had soldiers like this, unbelievably talented, had zero leadership potential, had zero desire to be in any leadership position whatsoever, would deny promotions and all kinds of purposely kind of nuke, like not having points to promote and all this stuff because they loved being a technician in what they did, right?
Right, and they were incredibly gifted.
They were incredible, and you need that, right? So the organizational and kind of talent management, there's so many problems with how the Army does it, but one like a legit problem is how do you balance the people who are really good at very technical things, and then how do you balance that with the fact that it does take this whole village approach, and it is like so many large pieces of moving stuffs, and you need it both to work.
Right.
Yeah. So just a kind of a tremendous amount of learning there. Maybe the last thing I'll say about Afghanistan is I had a front row seat to like how to not do energy. All of our power was generator based, diesel generator,
right.
To provide electricity 24/7 for everything, living, ops, whatever. And then we'd obviously get in these, up armored vehicles, which are not exactly the most fuel efficient things in the world. So you need a shit ton of fuel for that.
They're a bit heavy.
They're a bit heavy. And so what the front row seat that I saw was like, here we are in this mountainous landlocked country. We are shipping in a tremendous amount of diesel fuel from like, friendly places like Pakistan, right?
Yeah, they love us there. They love us there.
And you get caught in this vicious cycle where, perfect target, fuel-laden, slow-moving, non-armored. Like you want a more juicy target for IED attack or ambush,
or something that seems like it's an easy target.
Right. Like
not
very
not
obvious.
that hard to figure out.
Right.
Yeah.
So like they're getting smoked all the time, and then the vicious kind of cycle you get locked in is you have troops there, so you need fuel, and then you need troops to guard the fuel. And because you have more troops in there, you need more fuel. And because you have more fuel, you need more, right? So like you get locked in this cycle. And all of the time this is happening, it's like 120 degrees outside. I'm sweating my ass off with me and my guys, right? And there's no like, hey, like we've got this giant fusion reactor in the sky. Anybody want to use that for anything? No? Oh, okay, we'll just keep sending convoys.
Yeah, okay, so no then? All right.
Yeah, so like we couldn't use that for anything. You're saying like and the other obviously, somewhat of it's hindsight somewhat, I'm not excusing it though, is, when I was there in 2014, we had been there for 13 years.
A long time, yeah.
Like you were running a diesel generator this whole time. Like you couldn't, in 2014, like solar wasn't like a hippie fringe technology. Like it wasn't as cheap or as easy to use or as mainstream as it is now, but it wasn't like this wacky NASA technology. Like,
right.
You can't, because like you can't use that for anything, guys. Like, because what would happen is if you incorporated more, distributed, or forget like renewable, because it's not like and it's not an environmental thing. It's just like you don't have access to the grid because it doesn't exist.
Sure.
Right. So if you have distributed energy generation assets, even a little bit, what you're doing is that you're attacking the problem in like the best way, because what you are reducing the amount of fuel needed, fuel convoys, then troops to protect those convoys. Right. So like you get snowballing in the other way, right? Which would be super effective. No, that wasn't happening. And then we'd have, a bunch of vehicles that would do kind of on the installation, that never went out of the gate to just do whatever. And those were all internal combustion engine vehicles too.
Yeah, so like dozers and everything else.
Right.
Yeah, they're all.
Maybe like pickup trucks or like, golf cart-y equivalent things. And it was just like the dollar or the cost, both in terms of dollars and like blood, to get a gallon of diesel or whatever and to just burn it immediately is like inexcusable. So I came back from Afghanistan, I think, kind of jaded, a little pissed off, particularly about that, because we were there to ensure that like the roads could be used for a lot of stuff, like convoys is obviously one of them. And so, long story short, I link up with a longtime buddy of mine who I had met. He was going to Kettering University in Flint, Michigan, and I was going to Xavier, so we met in college. Nelson Wang, when I got back from Afghanistan, he was at MIT getting his PhD. That was double PhD in electrical engineering. And
so not a very bright guy.
One of the dumbest people I've ever met.
Right. Okay.
Painful to have a conversation with. And so...
It's a good thing he's not here.
Yeah, We'd have to really slow it down. Slow it down. I mean, truly... again, one of like eventually I hope to like stop walking in to rooms where I am the dumbest person in the room. Like, cause that's like,
man, don't endeavor for that, man. Be the dumbest guy. Cause that's the only way you learn a tremendous amount.
Every single room I walk into on a daily basis, I'm the dumbest person in the room by a mile, right?
Not this one.
Well, yeah, no, I think I probably am. And then, so I met Nelson, met up, reconnected with him. And what Nelson was doing while I was, started to do the Army thing and the Afghanistan thing was, Nelson was starting to do a lot of work with like DOE on, hey, we think like, distributed energy generation like solar and wind, that's probably going to be a thing. Electric vehicles may or may not be a thing. And batteries for energy storage in a very long time might be a thing. How do we make these things, more accessible, whether it's cheaper or easier to deploy or whatever? So that's what he had a lot
more reliable, whatever.
So he spent a lot of time on like that, general problem set. And he thought he could figure out a way to kind of attack a lot of pretty fundamental problems with all of these things, right? So although it didn't make any, I'm still on active duty, he's still in his PhD, and so it didn't make any economic sense at the time because all of these numbers were pretty shitty. Mm-hmm. Solar looked like it was going to pop through, but like 2015, like we're talking like, I mean, I joke with a lot of people that no one was taking electrification of transportation seriously. There was this one weird South African guy with a startup that was about to go bankrupt called Tesla.
He's still weird. He's awesome though.
So awesome.
Someone said he's the closest thing to actually Bruce Wayne that we've ever seen. He might actually be Batman.
Yeah. And like that was it, right? So it was like 2015, like they were, there was so much hate towards Tesla. If you even knew who Tesla was, if you knew him, they probably were shitting on him for some strange reason. Elon and the whole group and electrification in general. People were saying that hydrogen passenger vehicles were probably going. Like there were so many things wrong. But we said, okay, hold on. I still have a service obligation for the Army, and you still need to get your PhD. So let's light this fuse. Right. Because look, it's not like the market isn't ready.
Yeah.
So we know we have a lot of problems to solve technically. And so maybe we light this fuse and we burn real slow in the margins while I'm on active duty and he's in school and see if the market ever matures to where this makes sense, right? And like the fundamental idea was, all right, regardless of your motivation, whether it's climate and pollution or whether it is like energy security and resiliency, the cool thing and that a lot of these solutions look very similar, depending, it doesn't matter what your motivation is, right? Like a lot of these look the same. And so if a lot of the work that Nelson did also was like on how fragile the grid was.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so I spent like a lot of time, researching this myself and, it's a lot of times it's not what people think it is. A lot of the fragility of the grid. I mean, first of all, there's this amazing engine of progress that was built, to do a thing that doesn't remotely look like what we're asking it to do today.
Yeah.
Right. So like it wasn't designed or built to keep up with the modern lifestyle.
Right.
You layer in on top of that just like structurally unsound, like real life deferred maintenance on millions of miles of transmission lines.
Yeah, or just if there's an issue, they just kind of cobble it back together to get it working again.
Everything's a Band-Aid fix. Everything is a Band-Aid fix.
Because speed is of essence.
Speed is of essence, and nobody has globs of money to throw on all of these things, right? So, and it's getting older, and so the older it gets, the more Band-Aids, the more energy that we know. All civilizations, like the more advanced you get, the more energy hungry you are. Right. Right. So this problem is getting worse. It's getting rapidly worse. Just to give you some examples. We're talking about like blackouts and brownouts are up, 3 times what they were 30 years ago. I think the Department of Energy estimates, and this is a low number, $150 billion of economic damage every year to blackouts and brownouts.
Oh, wow.
A lot of this, and it's often like crazy things. Like there's nothing more humbling to live in a time when Elon is he's landing rockets
yeah.
and a significant percentage of our national grid infrastructure taken down because of squirrels.
Oh yeah, no. It was what's interesting is there was a hurricane. It was a couple of years ago now, but it hit Louisiana. Didn't even hit Texas.
Right.
And we lost power in my neighborhood because the substation that powered it is in Louisiana, where it was hit.
Sure.
And I was like, well, that sucks. Yeah. I mean, good grief. I didn't even think, I was like, oh, that sucks for Louisiana. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, no. And then couple that with the fact that now people are working from home more than ever.
Totally.
Because I work from home.
Totally.
And there have been times that we've had power outages for weather-related or whatever reason. And, I'm done for the day.
Right.
And so that's an interesting thought. And then take that even a step further, and then I want to kind of get back into starting the business and everything. But take that a step further and this big push for EVs.
That's it.
And then all of a sudden we're going to put Tesla chargers in every house that's already taxing the grid. It just, to me, there's at some point you're exceeding the Band-Aids.
And that right there, that specific, it's so awesome that you said that, right? Because like that specifically was for us, what we were predicting is the oh shit moment. Because it was like general wear and tear, deferred maintenance, old bones.
Yep.
Not great. layer in a more kind of energy intensive society. Really not good.
A little worse, yeah.
Right. And then you tether transportation, mobility to this fragile and failing grid system. Nightmare scenario, right? So, but if these things are going to happen, there's no puppet master, right? So if these things make sense to do, people are doing them. And we're seeing this on the electric vehicle side is like, and this is a huge change from when we started, is like that genie's kind of out of the bottle.
Sure.
So many billions are being pushed in that direction. Every major auto manufacturer in the world has said that they will go either entirely electric or mostly electric by like 2035.
Yeah, it's interesting that how motivating government subsidies can be.
Yeah. But the super interesting thing, and this is kind of talking to blue collar guys and some of the major auto companies that I've had an opportunity to talk to. Some people will say like, oh, there's no chance that GM or Ford will hit their electrification goals by 2040, and the guys on the pointier end of the spear say, no, we're gonna have to do it way sooner, or we'll go bankrupt. Because using the F-150 as an example, it's pretty tight. I mean, people don't really realize this, but making a car is pretty tight margins. There's not a lot of cushion. And so you can achieve economies of scale if you're doing it.
You're not a used car salesman, are you?
I'm not.
Okay, because
absolutely
that's
not.
very used car salesman-y.
Yeah.
To tell me, well, I don't have a lot of margin here to work with.
By the time they get it, right? That's several layers.
Correct.
And so what they're doing with electrification is if you have to then split, you need a different kind of plant that's tooled to do a different thing, a different supply chain, a different. You lose all of those economies of scale, right? So then your margins even shrink more.
Right.
And so one school of thought that I think is not being talked about enough is forget being too aggressive, or it's not aggressive. A lot of cases are I don't think they're being aggressive enough, because as long as you're operating off of this we're going to do ICE and we're going to do EVs on certain vehicle platforms, you can do that as a company. But if you're splitting the both of those, that's not you can do it for a transition for a little bit, and you have to. But you're not going to do that for 40 years. You'll go bankrupt.
Yeah.
So all of that was really we entered into this from hey, we think electric vehicles are going to be a thing, tethered to this fragile and failing grid system. How do we solve this problem, right? So that was the problem that we were trying to solve. And what we realized is if you go out, that's high level, right? Grid stuff and trends of electrifying transportation. So that's cool strategically in the cloud stuff, but tactically, in the weeds. If you went out right now, and we've done this multiple times, if you want to deploy real solutions that help you get around that, right? Produce your own energy, whether it's solar or wind, locally, on site.
At your house.
At your house, or in your parking lot of your business to serve your electric fleet. If you want to store energy in case there is an outage, or save a lot of money avoiding peak demand charges. And then you also want to have a EV charging infrastructure. What that actually means is you've got a bunch of complicated power electronic boxes, right? They're made by different people with different specs. They're expensive as hell put together, right? So, and it's very confusing and expensive to do, to try to deconflict all of these things across a whole bunch of stuff. So solving both that strategic and the tactical problem, we felt pretty strongly that these things needed to be together and way more simplified than it currently is. So maybe the easiest mental model is to think about, not that long ago, you needed a separate device to make telephone calls, a separate device to take pictures, and a separate device to get on the internet called a computer. And then a few folks had the great idea of putting these things together and layering in software and calling that a smartphone. That's what we're doing with clean tech power electronics, right? Okay. Is to take all of these different things and put them into literally one magic box, and then you can, that unlocks a lot of cool stuff, right? You can reduce the cost of this whole system by half, not a 5%, not 10%, half, right? Yeah. You can install them 3 times or faster, right? It's very modular, and you can scale up and scale down. So that is what we feel very strongly is the future, whether that's with the grid or without it, right? Like,
or generating power locally that's stored.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different, coolnesses that I won't really nerd out on right now, but so like that's what we were building in the margins while I was in the Army.
And so at that point, did you guys found CZAR?
Yeah.
Okay, so the company starts, and so your mentality around that is, man, there's this problem.
Yeah.
I know that this problem exists.
Yeah.
I know there's no real solutions out there for this problem.
Yeah.
I have a friend who is going to MIT. That always helps.
Yeah, always helps.
Always helps. I know firsthand what I saw from my time over in Afghanistan, that this is a need worldwide.
Correct.
And so it's something that is not just inherent to a community, it's international.
Totally.
Which goes back to your time in school, looking at international business and those types of things.
Yeah.
And so you've identified these through lines, and you're saying at this point, I've still got a commitment to the military.
Yep.
How many more years did you have?
I mean, I was probably there for 2 years, so I had 6 left. I mean, it was like a pretty
substantial amount of time.
Yeah.
And so you found a company.
Yeah.
And forgive me again, what was the guy's name? The other
Nelson.
guy? Nelson. Okay.
Yeah.
And so and Nelson's in this with you.
Yeah.
And so then what? You're like, okay, I'm setting this up for when I'm out of the military to be I'm gonna have a business.
Yeah, it was even like less structured than that, which is like I think is like important to. Because there's a lot of like entrepreneurial porn out there, and so what people do is they get hooked on entrepreneurial porn, especially here, especially in this country, and it's never like that in reality, right? So like to like totally.
So what would you say is entrepreneurial porn?
There's a huge list, right? But like this whole I saw it from day one, and then I did it, and then it worked. Like that's bullshit.
You just think it into existence.
You just burn your ships. Like what? Right. So like this is like a case study in the opposite of that, right? Particularly like the burning of the ships part.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because another interview I did, they specifically said burn your ships.
Yeah. Well, okay. So like let me unpack that because it's like very common. Like I am absolutely the rebel and the outlier and the blasphemer by saying don't, right? But
and both of you guys were Army, so I'm gonna let you guys fight it out.
Yeah. So here's why I would say that that's a really bad idea. So first of all, some people need the Cortez, torture ships. There's no way back home.
Yeah. There's only one way. Go through.
Right. When you have a family.
Yeah.
And and you're taking a swing at like a restaurant, right? Like not like we made like so many crazy bets that I would never encourage anyone to do, right?
Yeah.
It was like solar again wasn't like a hippie technology, but it wasn't the cheapest way to generate energy like it is today.
Well, I mean, you guys are looking at something and trying to solve a problem that people maybe haven't even identified as a problem.
Almost no one identified as a problem.
Right. So you run the risk of having to tell them there's a problem and convince them that exists, right?
And so, part of this was, I stood it up while I was in the Army because I wanted to stand it up. And I was locked into the service obligation, so it was what it was. The next thing was like, I was like, it was probably, and I think if you don't if you don't start with this, like the numbers are against you. And if everyone thinks that you're the exception, then like you're idiots. Like that's not, it's like whatever. In addition to 92% of statistics are made up on the spot, it's like 80% of drivers think that they're above average. It's like that's literally that's impossible, right? It cannot happen. And so a lot of that happens with entrepreneurship, where it's like it's not a coin toss. Like you are almost certainly going to lose.
Yeah.
So how do you structure your life to not be a catastrophic failure?
Right.
And so that was something that I was very motivated to do. Was like I think this thing's going to be a thing, but I'm not sure. And I want to not smother the kind of the entrepreneurial bug round one. Like, so this is the example like I have, like very personally, of why it's not a great idea in all cases to burn your ships. Mm-hmm. And it's, had I had the ability to leave the Army right then and there, I got the entrepreneurial bug, this was it, this was the future, let's roll, baby. I would have fizzled out.
Right.
Because there wasn't the money coming in to do the thing, because it didn't make sense economically to do 5 years ago. Right. So what the Army allowed me to do.
And to your point earlier, the market wasn't ready for that anyway.
It wasn't ready, which is like the error number one is, you're taking a huge risk to do stuff when the market is ready in general.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's a big risk to just survive when the conditions are perfect for you. If you're taking a bet on a bunch of future technologies that you're tied to, one of those shits, like, you're done. Like, it's a horrible idea.
There's going to be all these future technologies, and we're going to make them work all together. But they don't exist yet, but promise it'll work.
Right. Like that, like, why would you burn your ships? Like, for that,
That's fair.
And so the other thing, like the third thing, so like one was just like the obligation is what it was, so get over it. The second thing was like this was a major swing for the fences.
Sure.
That was almost certainly not going to work.
Yeah.
And the third thing was, and this actually is what ended up happening, having someone else, like having a job enabled us to, every dollar that we got, we pushed just into R&D. So there wasn't like me and my lifestyle that I had to support or family that I had to support at all.
Right.
So every investment dollar, every grant dollar, everything that we've ever gotten, we just pushed back into the company. That furthered research and development, and it wasn't like, I need to pay rent.
Right.
So, some people could say that like that's chicken shit entrepreneurship or whatever, but it's like, I would rather live in a country and live in a world where people are, don't take that one swing for the fences, strike out, and then like kill themselves or like never think about entrepreneurship again. Like, because the failure rate is so high, like how do we, if we have to fail, one, like let's try not to fail. And we can talk about that maybe later about, why the startup ecosystem sucks. And I think it's like not optimized for success, like structurally. But then, let's just, beyond that, it's like, hey, how do you have more people swing for the fences, and then if they strike out, like not starve to death, right? Or, being somewhat dramatic, but like,
but also somewhat literal.
Yeah, it's like a thing, right? Like if again, going back to some of the formative experiences as a child, like the gap between you trying to swing for the fences and do the startup life and versus like the opportunity cost of you working for the man is huge, right? So it's like maybe you could go and make $100,000 working for the man, and you're not going to do that. So you're going to do the startup world. Okay, well, now it's that other version of you 1 year later is $100,000 richer, right? And that's not only are you not making any money, you're burning money, probably personally, right? So now that delta might be 150K, and then you're going to do it for another year.
And there's 300. Yeah.
Right. And now you're at 300, and now
it's not cumulative; it's additive at that point.
Exactly right. And then there's also like a lot of other costs to entrepreneurship, like buying a house.
Sure.
When you tell anyone that's not in the startup community, like you're an entrepreneur, that's code for I'm unemployed. You know what I mean? Like that's not a thing, right? Like you can brag to your friends and post on Instagram or whatever that like, I'm an entrepreneur. But
hustle life.
Yeah, right. Hashtag hustle life. Like, but like a lender hears, you're unemployed.
You have no job.
You have no job. You have no way of paying me. So like, go fuck yourself. You're like, I'm not going to give you this loan.
Right.
So like, maybe I'm in the wrong circles, but I've never heard anyone say that about entrepreneurship. About specifically like, if you want to do this lifestyle, you need to figure out alternative ways to buy a house because you're probably not going to do it the way that you want to do it.
Right.
And so like that's just like one of 1,000 examples. So now that this delta is growing at year 2. And then you fail.
Yeah.
Hard. You burn out, mental breakdown, whatever. That's not even talking about like the family stuff. Like maybe your wife leaves you or husband leaves you or whatever the hell. And like now you're starting back from square one. But the trajectory now is just kind of between your other self is just kind of separating.
Yep.
Because now you've got 2 years of corporate or whatever, 5 years of corporate experience. Now you're getting, groomed for whatever vice president, blah, blah, blah. And it's like it's diverging rapidly. And so like the opportunity cost there is huge.
And you've also missed out on all of the experiences from a corporate, like learning business, learning how things structure, learning how things work well, don't work well, and figuring out where you fit in that world.
Yes.
And those costs can't be measured.
No.
Those are experience costs.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. Because like there is a point where like, even if you can make it work, you don't have those bones. You don't have that foundation. Like even if you're a successful entrepreneur, young, and maybe multiple successful time founder, you still might have a little bit of imposter syndrome in you, right? Because you're like, I don't really know
Right.
That
Right.
foundational thing, because nobody taught me.
Well, you're not that grizzled sergeant.
Yeah, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right. So, I think I would advocate for first of all, do a better job of figuring out people want what you're pretending to do or sell or make or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It seems like a pretty reasonable starting block, but especially in the tech community, I've found there's so many startups find a solution and then go looking for a problem.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Whatever, their nerdy eccentricities, they get wrapped up around a thing, and then they're like, oh, this is going to save the world. And then they don't show it to anyone. They go away in their ivory tower, right? And there's a lot of mental masturbation that happens, and then they pop out, and no one was interested in what because or two people are, right? It's turns out that wasn't super important.
Yeah, or even worse than that, they do come up with something that people want, and then as it begins to get traction, people ask for it to do certain different things, and they can't pivot on that. They say, well, that's not what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
Well, your audience says otherwise, and I think that's as important as identifying from the jump.
Sure.
Whether you even have a thing.
Yeah, and I think from our story, in particular, we weren't even focused because the market just wasn't even there. So, but we were focused on, solving a lot of technical challenges. How do you put these multiple systems in one thing, right? One magic box. Mm-hmm. And so that was a technical problem that Nelson and the team were working on kind of in parallel to me. So as that's happening on the side, I leave the engineer, organization that I was with. I went to teach counter IED with a great, contracting team. I was still in the Army, but I was the green suitor rep. Mm-hmm. With a Booz Allen Hamilton, awesome group of guys.
So civilian contractors.
Civilian contractors that I was over, but they had a contract to teach counter IED.
You were the government rep.
I was a government rep. I was a green suitor. Yep. But that was another example of. Now you're talking about folks that I worked with are retired 20, 30 years military, right?
Right.
One in Delta, right? One in Ranger Regiment, these guys are badass people with a tremendous amount of knowledge.
Super high speed
guys. And you had, me at that time was a first lieutenant, and so that was just another tremendous learning opportunity for me. And then there was this opportunity to be a engineer officer that would support. First Special Forces group. So in the Army, you've got Special Forces groups all over the country. First, everyone has an area of responsibility, and first is Asia and Pacific. That's that's their backyard. That's where they train. The languages are aligned to that. That's where they play. And the first group is out of Fort Lewis, so it's literally across the base. But I wasn't airborne qualified. I wasn't I wasn't that type of. But I was screw it. Let me just apply. And the interview went well, and I ended up getting picked up for that. And so I went over to support those guys, and that was an entirely different world. Monsters Inc. Stepping through a bunch of doors, and you're in this weird this is not like anything else that I've experienced before. Because
in what ways?
There's so many the culture was completely different than the conventional Army. Just a bunch of badass, older folks, all about getting shit done, right? Yeah. So there was far less bureaucracy, far less nonsense, because you're not worried about the horny 18-year-old doing something stupid, right? These are 35-year-old dudes with 17 deployments.
You're not worried about that kid going out and marrying a stripper over the weekend.
Right, that's right. or they've done it so much by the time they get to group that it just becomes the battle drill? Okay.
So that's that guy.
Yeah, that's that guy. Exactly. And that was a really interesting time, because those were during the Fire and Fury days. So President Trump, Commander-in-Chief, and that was the little Rocket Man spat with North Korea. Sure. And that's in First Group's area of responsibility. So, we were there a significant portion of the time I was at First Group. We were legitimately preparing to invade North Korea, right? And that's a sticky problem set. That's another one of these experiences where, I'm in South Korea with the Republic of Korea, Army and their special operations, and we're talking about how to do this. and you really get like a deep appreciation for the history and the culture of both North and South, and how unification of the peninsula is like really important to like both sides. And you also just realize like what a thorny problem set that is. Like you realize, North Korea's nuclear armed, right? And they've got a bunch of pretty nasty weapons. Seoul was built within conventional artillery range of North Korea, and so you're walking around Seoul, and at that time I've been to a few countries, and traveled quite extensively, and Seoul was unlike any other city I've been to. I mean, that is cities in the United States 50 years from now is Seoul.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're just walking down these massive, amazing structures, walking down the street, looking at all of these, and you're all just like, oh, you guys are in conventional artillery. Like literally some illiterate person with a string just pulls it, and then there's an artillery
right, it's hitting you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one could be headed here right now.
Right. And so you realize any conflict, a ridiculous amount of innocent people die off the rip, right? Immediately. Yeah. And then you also realize it's a pretty mountainous peninsula. Like logistics is very hard to do and to move, and just a tremendous amount of learning. Talking about the subterranean, literally tunnels that North Korea has. Then how do you detect them and how do you defeat them? And the complexity of that problem set was so significant. And then you also realize that's why we haven't done anything, because when you do the calculus, you're like, okay, we'll 100% win. There's a 0% chance that we wouldn't win. But the victor gets to inherit whoever's left of 25 million starving, brainwashed, illiterate North Koreans.
Yeah.
Yay, that's your consolation prize, right?
Yeah.
And there's probably going to be some kind of WMD exchange.
Also be like a resistance force probably too, because they wouldn't know any different.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's brainwashing is a real thing,
sure.
Right? And so there's talk of, could North Korea hit the United States with a nuclear weapon? It's well, regardless of if they could or not, they can hit Japan.
That's correct.
Where we have people.
Yeah.
A lot of Air Force presence. They can sure as hell hit the 50,000 or whatever U.S. troops that were in South Korea.
Yeah.
And then there's this even this other thought process, which was maybe they don't need to send anything out, right? As the U.S. and allies and South Koreans are coming up, they just set off a nuke in place, right? You don't have to send it anywhere. You just detonate it in North Korean territory, right? So there's all of these different ways that this could have unfolded. And none of it's great. And then they're well, what's China going to do? Right? Because that was a big deal.
That's
with
a different thing,
Korean War Episode 1. That was a huge deal, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you handle loose nukes? And there was all of this great learning that happened as a result of everything is complex, right? Everything it's not easy. And if you have somebody who says it is, they don't get the full picture. And so that whole time I was in Japan, I was in Korea. I was on a really cool mission in Mongolia, and then I got drugged kicking and screaming from first group to go back to the schoolhouse. Got promoted as captain, and then you got to go to school, right? Captain school. So I got pulled from the Pacific Northwest kicking and screaming. I was supposed to be there 2 or 3 years. I was there for 5.5 or 6 or something crazy.
Right.
Went back to Missouri for captain school, got my master's degree in geological engineering concurrently with that. And then I went off to the 101st Airborne in Fort Campbell, in Kentucky, Tennessee. And that was a whole different experience, right? So and then I ultimately got out of the Army from there. And that was a whole different experience. Just a very different unit with a very different mission. While I was there, was in Europe and Africa, and there's a bunch of interesting things that happened there. Deployed to America, which I was not a huge fan of. Mm-hmm. Under the kind of the auspices of helping Customs and Border Patrol. I get a little bit creeped out when you're taking any federal military force, particularly an infantry brigade combat team, which is optimized to
tear things up.
Right. Kill people and break things internationally. And then you're retooling, but you're not retooling anything. You're reprioritizing that unit to come to America to do a job that doesn't remotely look like killing people and breaking things internationally.
Right. And also that job involves direct interaction with other Americans.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I was pretty got into trouble because I was very, very vocal. Like, this isn't cool.
Yeah,
right?
This is not what I signed up for.
This is not what I signed up for. And like, it's not like, this is not, oh, you're against Customs and Border Patrol. Like, no, like I had a front row seat for, 6 or 9 months of all of the intricacies to that problem set. And like, that's thorny, right? Like that, God. All of the different ways that, folks are smuggled in and how awful, coyotes are and how that interplays with legit, folks seeking asylum and how that plays with, terrorists trying to influence.
Right.
Like I'm very familiar with how thorny that problem set is. But like kind of on a higher level, I thought it was completely inappropriate that you're taking a group that is optimized for death and destruction, and then you are deploying them to the entire southwest border of the United States, to help, and depending on, how abrasive you want to be with your language, or, be bitch boys to Customs and Border Patrol. And so what we saw was a lot of issues, right? Like you've got guys who are optimized to
default aggressive, but because you're in America, the eyes are on you, as they should be, and so like you're in this weird thing where like you can't, all of this posse comitatus comes into play, and like you can't apprehend a migrant, but you got to call, hanging out in an F-150 and rando part of Arizona, and you have to call Customs and Border Patrol to come. So like the other side of this is like I also saw like the cost of this. Yeah. It was just like ballooning. And I also saw the military being used as a political tool, right, which I was not cool with. There's and it makes me, and I know like a lot of other veterans, very uncomfortable with some of the not even just like thank you for your service, but like there's this weird dynamic in this country where there's so much like an uncomfortable amount of like praise that I've always been uncomfortable with, right? Because I'm just like a guy doing a job, and I'm, like there's all this bullshit of like volunteer, like. Right. I was getting paid.
You're getting paid, and overpaid for most, mostly of what you're doing, right? Like let's cut the shit, right? You're getting you're getting compensated really well. Whether that's a combination of your salary, but certainly it's absolutely overpaid when you're talking about free healthcare and right things like you don't realize until you're out of the Army. That's like a huge expense. Like
dude, for us when my wife being a veteran, buying a home,
buying a home
with VA loan is zero down. I mean, are you kidding me? Like it's awesome, and she's 50% disabled too, so we get all these breaks and everything from taxes.
Mailbox money coming in every month. 100%, right? So, like there was a big problem with how that was rolled out, because I it was very kind of apparent. It was in an election year. If you don't like Customs and Border Patrol, you can kind of like not fund them or defund them, but you're not going to say anything about the troops. So you use the troops to effectively serve a role that they're not optimized for. And just like, and you're essentially using them as like top cover because they won't be criticized.
Yeah, and you're also using them to backstop any losses you have in Border Patrol.
That's exactly right.
From attrition, but
that's exactly
most certainly because of political stances.
That's exactly right. And so, that's just like a mess. Like you're being used as a political tool to do a job that you're not optimized. Again, like I'm not saying, of course it's important to have border security.
Sure.
Right? Like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like I get weirded out because like the other thing that I saw that was unfortunate is like the last thing that I saw in the Army, but it was important, is again going back to this very thin veneer. There's a lot of cowardice in the military, and there's a lot of yes-manning happening. And so, the military has done a tremendous job, I think, again, when you look at it from an international perspective, like the subservience of the military to civilian leadership is to me equally or greater than the peaceful transfer of power in the executive office, right? Because like it's very easy that a bunch of tribal, aggressive, mostly men will just kind of put up with some idiot civilian leader telling them to do something, or downsizing, or doing something that they, because in a lot of other countries they'll be like,
turns out I'm trained to kill you.
Yeah, and so it's like, wait, who has the guns? I do. Okay, no, right?
Yeah.
So like that's again another amazing thing that I'm so grateful for in the country. But what I saw in that whole operation was you just saw a lot of yes manning, and then you realize that like things don't go sideways because there's certain people that are just standing up for things, and like when you don't see a whole lot of that, you realize like, oh shit, anything can be justified.
Right.
Over classifying information, like, hey, it's not popular to do what we're doing. So how do you solve that? Well, you just if you say anything about what you're doing in America,
it's classified.
It's classified. So now you'll be in prison. And it's like, well, this is not classified information. Yeah, but we've classified it. So like, get bent, right?
Yeah.
And so I can't tell my family or a news outlet, like, we're burning money doing this stupid thing that doesn't make sense to do, or I'll go to prison. And like, so like I saw the dark underbelly of how like a lot of, cowardice. And it was, I'm not one to pull punches. And I was like very outspoken
and
about
to
that.
be clear, your point isn't, the boots on the ground guy is not a coward. It's at the brass level, the upper tier that's saying, I want to keep my, bullshit position or whatever. And so I'll do whatever you're asking me to do, whether I agree with it or not.
Totally.
So, because I do think that the frontline guys, those guys are out doing it. Those guys are absolute monsters. They're not cowards.
No, and like what pissed me off so much was that it was those are the guys that have to sweat their asses off doing a bullshit job away from their family. We had so many.
And heaven forbid that job end up looking a certain way that they don't want it to.
And that person getting crucified, which happened, right?
Multiple times.
And we had guys missing the birth of their kid.
Right.
They're in America. Like inexcusable, right? So like what I was so pissed off about was
give that guy a ride to wherever his kid is and bring him back later. I mean,
and so what you had was all this weird mashup. You had like people with delusions of grandeur who deployed a bunch to Afghanistan, try to make a deployment to America so there's like a bunch of weirdnesses. Like, your family has to get authorized to.
Do they have a special ribbon for deployed to America ribbon?
Yeah.
That's a serious question.
Just like a little, no, because like I was joking. Well, I mean, maybe they do. I was just gonna do like a little chili pepper, maybe like on a ribbon, like a white with like a little red.
Sun Devil, because you're in Arizona.
Yeah. We had Marines in California, and then we went Arizona, or New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, right? Like literally the entire southwest border. We had people on. And so, that was a front row seat to like in the upper levels of bureaucracy, how cowardice at that level for like pure career interests can trickle down to hurting the guys on the pointy end of the spear. And I also saw, like, this was, I think, the most like disheartening part was you saw how easy a message starts from like a yes man for like pure self-interest and turns into like, no, it's for like national security, and then like that line is then dropped down.
And at some point in that exchange, they know that they're not being truthful.
Exactly.
And then at some point, they end up convincing themselves that
somewhere in that chain,
real.
It's real, right? And absolutely right. And so, that was not a great. Well, it was like a disappointing experience, but like I'm so grateful for that, because now like I know like that exists, and like that is a risk that we have in this country, is like the leadership at higher levels can just and look, this is like regardless of your political persuasion, right? Like this happened to be when President Trump was in office, but it could have very easily happened with President Biden or someone else. Like it's like if you are so selfish and blinded, egotistical to throw your entire, everything downstream of you under the bus, you're going to do that regardless of who's sitting in the White House or whatever.
Yeah, it is a level of selfishness. I also think in some ways it's a level of a lack of self-confidence, because you're there.
Yeah.
and you're terrified that if you're no longer there,
Yeah.
then I can't duplicate this success, right? So then I'm just going to be out.
Yeah.
And that has to that perspective and that vantage point has to inform you as a leader now in a company.
Sure.
Of being susceptible to that potentially,
absolutely.
right? And,
Yeah, totally.
and then next thing you know, the people that are working in your team are looking at you going, "This son of a bitch only cares about
Yes.
X, Y, or Z,
Right.
without regard for what it does to us."
Yeah. And I think I was so fired up because like my natural inclination is to always, and this was true like from day one in the Army. I think a lot of this again was based on childhood, and like I would always, even in high school, like I was closest with like janitors, right? And like like I've always kind of understood that the people who actually run shit are not the people with like the titles.
But I think if people thought, if you ever stop and thought, if there weren't people collecting your garbage, if there weren't people making sure that the sewers ran,
the real heroes, truly, the real heroes.
If that didn't exist, this place would be a shithole.
Like people think
biblical purport.
People think that I'm joking when I say this. The number, like my favorite number one public servant who should get all of the accolades for everything and thanked for their service every single day, above the military, above firefighting, above police work, above, garbage men. Because I've been to places where that shit isn't figured out and everything else in society collapses.
Yeah.
Because health and everything just collapses. Like if you don't have as basic as it sounds, if you don't have a system and a dude or dudette making sure that system removes waste and trash from where we live and put it elsewhere, everything else in the society collapses.
So then, would you then take that same mentality into formation of a business and say
Totally.
you've got to have someone in there
Totally.
to figure out where waste is and remove that, or the business gets sick and dies?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only like, do you need that person, but it's not like like this. Oh God, we gotta have a ditch digger. It's like, oh, no, like that person is extremely important.
Right. Exactly.
And you need to communicate that. Like I think there's a lot. Again, like one of these lessons that the Army taught me was, dude, thank people. Don't blow smoke up their ass, but like appreciate them for doing a job that you appreciate them doing.
Right.
Right. And that goes a long way. Like you don't need to overpay people. You don't need to give people a bunch of equity. If you just like look somebody in the eyeballs and be like, dude, you crushed that.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
One-on-one, or even in a public setting.
Especially in a public
setting.
setting.
Huge.
Yeah, especially in a public setting.
That's almost, there's no dollar amount associated with that. It's even close.
Yeah.
That will motivate people when money doesn't. Because money, my experience is, you get a bonus and you have that money for a minute, and then you spend it on dumb shit, and then you're like, I don't have that money anymore.
Yeah.
But if someone compliments you, I mean, you remember that.
You remember that for sure.
It never goes away.
And so like there were like, unfortunately fortunately the all of the conditions, all of these bets that I made with CZAR years ago, they all started to like all these dominoes started to fall. Right. So the conditions were set for me to get out. And you
were naturally coming to the end of your obligation.
I was at the end. And so like then was the decision on do I stay in or because and do something like I really loved or do this other thing. And it was a pretty easy decision at that point where it was to bounce. All of the conditions were set. Like there was still a lot of hard work to do, but to transition out to take the plunge and do this for real, right? And so like I think like it's whatever. You could say it's unfortunate. I think it was very fortunate to have like that bitter taste at like the last little thing I did in the Army, but like collectively that took like pre-Army, formative years, blended it with all of the lessons learned in the Army, and all of those things collectively shape like who I am today and how I think about entrepreneurship and how you think about like taking care of a team, and like all of those things are extremely relevant to growing a business. Well,
so you mentioned that last look sort of with the Army was kind of bitter. Do you think it would have been as bitter if you didn't have CZAR kind of starting to things dropping? Would you have looked at it the same way and been, or do you think that question. Colored maybe how awful that looked?
No, I think what it did was it emboldened me to speak up.
Gotcha.
Because I was like, fuck you, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I got this other thing.
You're going to kick me out of the Army?
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
I got this other thing, right? So I think
it provided freedom in a lot of ways.
It did, which is why the other reason I would honestly advocate for this not burning the ships thing, right? Like one way to think about this is that you have income coming in, and look, you can milk that for too long, and the opportunity, the market like passes you by because you're afraid to make the jump. So like, sure, of course, but to be able to funnel money and not pay your salary or your lifestyle and funnel that to the team to build the thing. And then to have that, and then to also do that parallel with, there comes this time where the balance of power shifts, right? Where it's like, I'm going to do this little startup thing on the side, and it's kind of going to be a hobby until I can figure shit out, and then I'll have my big boy job. And then like if the idea is sound and you're working, you're really committed to it, that'll pretty steadily start to grow, and then it'll get to the point where it's like, I don't need this big boy job, this normal traditional job, and I can just jump ship. And I think that it emboldens you, again, not to be like an asshole, but to take a little bit more risks to do, because like you realize on both sides of the house, you're not going to drown. Mm-hmm. If things go sideways, you're not going to die. You're not going to be homeless. Your kids aren't going to be whatever, destitute. Like, I think for me, having that dual track for so long really emboldened me to do like the right thing or to take a lot more risks, because it was like, all right, well, if this comes burning down, I'll just go over here, right? And so like that, I think psychologically for me, I know everyone's different, but for me, that was very important.
All right, so at this time, you transition from the military,
Yep.
And then you go full-time czar.
Yeah, full-time czar. And like made just about every mistake anybody could make in that transition.
At what year is this?
This was 2021.
2021.
Yeah.
And czar has been around at this point for how many years?
Like 5.
5.
But again, like around like solving a lot of from a technology perspective, it had been going on that long. From a business perspective, like a lot of the market kind of had to catch up, but that kind of happened almost overnight. Like it felt like overnight. Like there was more. I remember like there was more action in a 6-month time frame than there was in the last 6 years collectively.
So it was like no market.
Out of nowhere, and I mean, it was out of somewhere. It was out of Tesla, right? Like that's where it was.
Sure.
Once that model, had legs, it was just a feeding frenzy for all of this stuff, right? Because what happens is, all of these things do make sense to have together, because this interplay of charging and, I was reading an article before I came down here that Tesla and, ERCOT was saying like, hey, like don't charge your electric vehicle. Like what?
So I'm oil and gas, and that made me laugh when I read that, because it's like, Tesla's asking people not to charge because of the strain on the grid. And I was like, duh. Yeah, right. So like for us, it was like all of these things were happening, and it's, you throw like Ukraine into this mix, and you throw, in Ohio, $5 plus a gallon of gas, California, $10. Yeah, it's when I hear those things, and a lot of that has to do with those state taxes being heaped onto already high prices, right? Sure. But I mean, we're below $4 here in Texas right now, but not much below. Yeah, it's still expensive.
And so what you saw with just like another example of the fragility of large systems, right? And so like you have some geopolitical issue happen, and maybe it's like, I don't care what the hell is going on in Ukraine. Well, like you do when it's $10 a gallon of gas, and then all of your prices across the board are going up, right? Like that matters. Yeah,
and I think what frustrates people with that is that is part of the story. Yeah. It's not the entire story.
No, of course it's not. Right?
And it's being sold as the entire story, and then that breeds distrust and everything else, and some of the stuff that we talked about already. But,
yes, because a lot of this was like, if you restrict the capacity to pull hydrocarbons out of the ground here. Yeah. So I just read the book, The Prize. I do obviously a ton of reading on all kinds of stuff, but energy is obviously a big focus, and that was like this short history of oil, right, predominantly, and how like that affected geopolitics for the last 100 years.
But it still is, and
still does. Yeah, obviously. And so I kind of look at this as I've never been a huge ideologue on energy, right? Mm-hmm. To me, it was, you got to take a deep breath, and you got to say, all right, well, what are the things that we don't like? Like, we don't like over-reliance on one thing. That's fragility, right? I had an amazing conversation with Jose Becerro from the Greater Houston Partnership yesterday here, and kind of, I mean, it's just a phenomenal human being in general. But we talked about how, because Houston's economy was so tethered to oil and natural gas, that any event, whether that's COVID or whether that's a bottom out in prices, has like ripple effects in the entire economy, right? And to like, hey, maybe it makes sense to diversify that a little bit, right? Like let's think about energy a little bit more holistically. How does it, energy storage and solar and wind and like all the kind of the full suite of technologies. And so like all of these things are all coming together right now, right? But I got out. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. In the tech startup life. So, I wasted probably 6 months talking to like software investors, trying to talk to them about clean tech hardware. Right.
Right.
The other side of this was like, and this is and Mush knows this. I grew up in a part of the country that was sold out. And I saw what happened when all of like what that does to a culture and what that does to a mentality when you're part of the Rust Belt and those jobs are pushed overseas. And so like making this solution in America was not like an option.
Yeah,
like that was going to happen.
Right.
Whether we found a manufacturer here, or whether we did it ourselves.
Right, or whether we became a manufacturer.
Correct. Like literally, like for me, it was one of those things, like that was a hill to die on. Like I don't give a fuck if that was in vogue or if that, that was something that we were going to do.
Right, this was not an option.
It was not an option.
What we're doing.
Because was that an emotional decision? Yeah, it was. Like it was, because again, like I come from a part of the country that got, I watched all of the negative cascading effects.
Generational effects.
I mean, and it manifests itself in, just kind of general pessimism or substance abuse, heroin overdose, like all of those things generationally happen. What happens when you fire someone because you try to save a few pennies per pound making something in China or somewhere else, and now they don't have a job. And now that causes stress. So maybe there's a divorce, or maybe, they turn to alcohol or drugs, and then, make bad decisions, and then their kids are brought up in that environment. And then so like, it's literally like this progressive collapse and
then far enough removed from the source, those individuals see no way back. They don't even know where back is.
They don't know where back is.
Yeah.
And that's not somewhere in flyover country. That's where
in
I
Ohio.
fucking live.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And like those are like my friends, and my friends are descendants of kids and grandkids of folks who were kind of sold downstream. So like that was a very, very personal thing for me. To layer on top of all of that, I think was like this sense of, if you make something, you're dumb. Like I spent probably too much time on the East Coast and West Coast, particularly the West Coast, where like that was a very, Silicon Valley, software as a service, people sassing their way whatever, right? And look, it makes sense, right? It makes sense. I'm not like a weird Luddite anti-software guy. Of course it makes sense, right? And there's so many great things from an investment perspective, infinitely scalable, high profit margins. You don't have to worry about a supply chain, and can Bob send this to Tim, and then Tim make this into something he can give to Ed, and I buy it from Ed. Like, you don't have to worry about any of that.
Right.
So I understand like SaaS as a model, as an investment, like I got it, right? But I think there was this disdain, and it was very thinly veiled, if it was veiled at all, for like blue collar Americans who make shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And the best shit.
And so what I saw was this selling out of America for like not a tremendous amount of like, per unit. It looks like a marginal increase.
Yeah.
Shipped everything overseas.
Yep.
And then, wherever that is in the world, they can not have any environmental regulations. They can kind of go ham, no unions, no whatever, right? They can go nuts over there. And so like then you're like patting yourself on the back because you
some veiled, moral superiority.
Right. Like, well, we don't have, emissions to do that. Yeah, because you're doing it in another country. You're poisoning their water. Like,
correct.
Cool guy.
Yeah.
Like, that's why it rains acid in their country, right?
Yeah. But not here, though.
Right. But not here. That's just, and then it manifests itself in like disdain, right? Like the deplorables, right? It's like, it goes from, you're the backbone of America. And that's what the Midwest Rust Belt, like we made America, and then that gets sold off, and then there's that kind of progressive collapse, and then there's this just inexcusable, almost victim blaming. Like you're a dumbass for being a coal miner, and it's like, well, what? Like
Mush and I talked a little bit about that, and I said I asked him the question, and then he basically gave a similar answer to what you're saying now. Is there's been such an emphasis on getting a college degree, and I think that's important.
Sure.
If you get one, it better be in something that's high skill, high demand, high salary, because there's a lot of money associated with getting that degree.
Right.
Other than that, man, there are tremendous jobs out there that are blue-collar jobs that'll pay you well.
Totally.
But I think that's been stigmatized to the point that people don't even think of them as an option.
Right. Well, it's exactly right. And it's really weird because not only are those like great paying jobs, but you don't also incur this debt.
Right.
This mortgage equivalent of debt that you're saddled with.
Right.
That you're paying interest on. Like that's not like a free money.
Right.
Right.
And it's unlike a mortgage because it never goes away.
It never goes away, right? Even if you die.
Until you're done.
Right.
Yeah.
And like that's ridiculous. And you layer on top of that, this is another kind of topic that I'm pretty passionate about. And I'm going to say some strong words, but I don't really care. Like, I think the education situation in this country is really bad because you've got universities who, like, I think it's pretty fair to say, it might be blunt, but pretty fair to say, like they practice, like financial pedophilia. Like they prey on minors and financially fuck them for the rest of their lives. And so they prey on 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, get them to come to school, major in some nonsense that's cheap for them to mass produce.
Right.
Don't care about the outcome. Saddle you with ridiculous amounts of debt, and then entice you because you're talking to teenagers. Hey, come here because the food's good, or we've got a nice green space.
Like our football team's awesome.
Our football team's awesome, and major in this thing that's easy and that I can, like, without a half a brain, pump out this nonsense. Wakandan anthropology, right? Like underwater basketball, whatever the thing is, and then you graduate from college saddled with ridiculous amounts of debt, and then you also don't know how to do anything.
Yeah, and you have an unrealistic expectation you're going to come out making six figures.
That's exactly right. And I like that is again part a lot of my motivation is when you're preying on people, and the little guy is like something that fires me up. And in this case, it's literally children that you are purposefully targeting to entice them to come to your university, knowing that the outcome is going to be suboptimal, to say the least.
Yeah,
in most cases,
at the very best, in a lot of cases, you just hope like just sort of
break even.
Just an even, right?
Right.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think that message gets lost a lot.
It does,
and because of that stigma, and because for some reason people think it's embarrassing to say, hey, you know what, man, I work in a manufacturing environment building things.
Right. I'm an electrician, right, or whatever, a plumber. Right. And I think like there's a lot of ways to solve this. So I'm not like, first you've got to, admit that there's a problem. That's step one. And there's a lot of people who aren't even willing to admit that there's a problem. I think we're past that. And like, there's a lot of the cool thing, like what I get pumped up about is like, there's a lot of ways to solve this, right? Like one way to solve this is universities do a more conscious and like official job, or like of partnering with or doing it themselves, doing trade schools, right? So then like from their motivation, it's not a competition, it's not a net loss. you're going to need to learn a trade somewhere. You can
Right.
learn it at the university, right? Like that's
Right.
it's
Yeah,
not
you still get a degree.
right. Or it's like, and even if it's not like a degree, if here in Houston or if Rice or wherever is in charge of your electrician school, like why not? Right?
Sure.
Like so then you're like, hey, like then you're truly taking children from high school and saying, hey, come to this entity. We can a little bit beyond university because it's more than it's university plus.
Right.
It's like, and you pick a path, like they can still win because they're still generating revenue from educating,
Right.
but the education is different and the outcomes are different. And like that's just like a way to solve this problem, because we're seeing like straddled with a tremendous amount of debt, useless skill, not even a skill, just useless information. At the same time, demonizing real work,
Mm-hmm.
real labor, and how that manifests itself, and like driving costs up for everything, right? And so you've got all of that nonsense happening at a really critical time in our country where there's a lot of really cool, crazy work that needs done across
built.
exactly things that need built.
That's right.
Across all sectors. Obviously, I'm pretty biased and jazzed up about the energy sector.
Sure.
But like just that sector alone could mean like a whole bunch of things. Right?
Sure.
And that'll look a lot like guys and gals who do real shit, make real shit, and put it in the ground.
Yep, that's right. And do you think, like you said, it's a non-starter to manufacture your stuff somewhere else? It's going to be in the U.S., right?
Yeah.
And I love that. I'm American, right?
Sure.
So I love that.
Sure.
Have you done any studies to see whether that sort of mentality is going to stymie that effort? Or researched it any to say, man, is there enough labor force for me to even pull this off?
Yeah, it's a great question. Magically, industry has found some religion on this, and it's because of COVID.
Yeah.
And the zero, using China as just one of many examples. China has a zero tolerance policy for COVID. So things shut down, they shut down.
Yeah.
Mega cities shut down.
And hey, guess what? If all of your stuff's built over there, you don't get it now.
Yeah. And how did you like, ports being shut down or people working, half shifts? Because now you can't get things, even if, like, so the factories in China won't make it because they're shut down. If they make it, you can't get it out of the country because that's shut down. If you can get it out of the country,
you can't get it in.
You can't get it in this country. And so and now all of a sudden there's this like awakening for like reshoring. And it's like, it pisses me off because like there wasn't like,
duh.
Right. It's like, duh, and you bastards.
Yeah.
Like, are now just coming around to this because now it's economically uncomfortable for you to maintain your operations overseas.
And I think if people understood truly the minor amount of savings associated with
absolutely.
that. And I think I was listening to, I think it was on Rogan, but Jocko was talking about Origin. Origin, Maine.
Right. Yeah.
And they build jiu-jitsu gis, obviously, and then like jeans and boots and all this stuff, and it's all in America.
Yeah. High quality.
Super high quality. And it's expensive, but it would be expensive if he had it done somewhere else too, because it's that kind of stuff. But he was talking about, if I take a pair of jeans and I send them overseas to be built, and I have to pay the ship over there, ship back, all these fees, everything. He goes, I'm literally saving pennies.
Yeah, it's not a lot
to do that.
It's not a lot.
And he's like, so I'll just do it here. With Americans.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable to think about it. Like you mentioned, you saw your community be sold out. It's almost like a selling out of America.
I mean, it absolutely is, right? That's pretty inexcusable. Period. Full stop.
Correct.
It's really inexcusable when you're talking about saving pennies.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Like,
when you're selling out,
you
you should never do it. But if you're going to do it, it should be for more than pennies.
Yeah, right. And so for us, like being like a high, having a high tech solution, something that's a little bit more high touch. That's that's a great thing to actually make in America.
Absolutely.
Right. So like from and this is again kind of all of this is intertwined. A lot of the time I spent in the first 5 years in the Army, like the area of responsibility was the Pacific, right? So I'm pretty intimately familiar from like a geopolitical perspective. Like if you were going to have this magic power electronics box get made somewhere else, it would be South Korea, China, or Taiwan, maybe Japan. And I'm intimately familiar with all of those countries' geopolitical issues, right? Whether it's North versus South Korea, whether that's, China, Taiwan,
Right.
how both of those conflicts could impact Japan, that's what I studied for a long time. And so you layer in geopolitical risk on top of the risk of intellectual property theft, on top of just like supply chain risk,
Right.
like physically moving things from half a world away here, and all of what that means. And you layer all of those negatives alongside all of the benefits to domestic manufacturing, right? Like, shrinking the distance, the physical distance, which is important, I think, between the R&D team and like the team that makes stuff.
Right.
Again, another parallel to the Army is like you've got some high level 500-pound brain guys, phenomenal for a thing, but maybe not the greatest. Like those are different. That's a different skill set than folks who are like grizzled, experienced operators who make shit.
Yeah.
Right. So and you need them both. You need to have the innovative folks get paired with seasoned operators to make something really impactful and really cool. And so like that can happen here. That can happen domestically. You're shrinking the distance between your customer and your manufacturer, right? You're shrinking so all of these things are all benefits. There'll be a lot of supposedly a lot of like made in America, American-made provisions for, EV charging infrastructure as just like one example, right? Who knows what that's going to look like? Like what is made in America and what is the federal government going to classify that? But like for us, that's already on our that was never like an issue. Like we were always going to be made here. Period. Right. And so like I think like again just popping out of just my own personal wiring. For anyone, like those are like all of those reasons are still true, whether you're me and doing power electronics or not. Like you're still going to worry about geopolitical issues, intellectual property theft, supply chain risk, and you're still going to, the benefits are shrinking that distance between the point at which good ideas are had, and then the point at which they're made, and then the customer and where their things are made.
And then when you realize too the potential opportunity costs, if any of that stuff experiences a hiccup,
totally,
then you're like, well, shit.
Yeah.
It just ends up, and like that same vector just starts getting wider and wider. And so that's how you and Mush get together.
Yeah.
Because Mush is a manufacturing guy.
Yeah. So
and so you and Mush get together and are solving the manufacturing concern, right?
Yeah. So like there's a ton I could say about him personally and kind of alchemy in general. Just like him as a human being, like truly one of my favorite humans ever. Right? Like
He's definitely an interesting one. He's very, very fun to be around.
He's like an amazing person. He's like my opposites in a lot of ways. Like he's extremely calm and measured, extremely professional, extremely wise, extremely generous. Right? Like he is just an all around great human being.
Yes.
Just like him as a person. But then his company, Alchemy Industrial, he's got a great team there as well. And as far as like alignment, philosophical alignment on making things in America, I found my match probably with him, right?
Maybe. He might be a little ahead of you on it. I mean, he's definitely very, very, very interested in that.
Yeah. And so, that partnership what meant a huge deal to us, right? So again, kind of popping this out of just like from a CZAR lens and a personal lens, but like, what are some of the lessons that, I've learned the hard way that can be applied for, anyone else who's watching or listening, that I think would transfer to all of those folks, or at least a wider subset of folks, is, so we said, we went around America for a while, for about a little over a year, to try to figure out like who was our manufacturing partner. And we didn't like a whole lot of options for various reasons. Either they didn't have the technical capability of doing it, they just wanted to have like this boring, exchange bag o cash for services. Like that wasn't like doesn't excite us a whole lot.
And by definition, that's not a partnership.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Right.
That's a transaction. And so, we kind of made the decision internally that, all right, well, we're not going to make it somewhere else. So we're going to make it here. So we're going to make it under our roof, right? Like, and that means
so
stuff.
you guys had gotten to the point
we made the decision. We've got to do it here. We got to do it here.
We're going to do it in America. We can't find the right partner, so we'll just do it ourselves.
Right. And what that means, again, tactically, is like we need to find Like we got the badass, wicked smart, prototyping guys.
Yep.
Not the same as like product guys are not the same, or prototype guys are not the same as a product guy, right?
Right, and not the same as the group that's going to scale that
Right.
the way it needs to go.
Right. So what does that mean? If we're going to do it in-house, it means that we need to find those people. We need to find them. We need to hire them. We need to gainfully employ them. We need to rent or lease a bunch of manufacturing equipment. We need to put it all under one big-ass roof to house everybody, right? And all of those things are expensive,
Yeah.
right?
So that means overhead out the ass to figure it out.
Right. So for us, for what we were trying to do, we were estimating that as about like $3 million.
Wow.
Just like to just do that. Just do that. Like that's nothing else. None of our other cool guy skunkwork plans, like that was just that. And so the partnership with Mush and Alchemy, what that did, I think fundamentally, was it de-risked the prototype to product valley of death.
Gotcha.
Because I'm pairing super smart innovators with experienced operators.
Right.
That's a marriage that needs to happen.
Right.
To de-risk a new technology. The second thing it did was, it took essentially $2 to $3 million off balance sheet. Like, here's what we were planning on needing to raise to hire these humans to do this and to get this machinery and
buildings and everything.
Now it's off balance sheet, right? That's Alchemy's responsibility now. And then the third thing was it really kind of did, all of the things that we talked about all the benefits to onshoring and the negatives of outsourcing. It made those like a tangible reality.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So like those are like the three buckets that I would put as the so what to everyone to kind of think about is, how do you de-risk a new technology? You got to pair it with somebody who knows how to build shit at scale. When you're thinking about the make versus buy decision, and look, some people might decide, hey, we're going to make it in-house because maybe it's not $3 million for somebody. Maybe it is. Maybe it's more.
Right.
But to think about it in that way of like, if you can partner with a manufacturer, like a real partnership, long-term, close-ass partnership, all of the things that can start to unlock. Because now, like, here's just one example of like how close, we are and what that means. If we're thinking about both hiring an electrical engineer, like I can just talk to Mush about like a hiring strategy. Like, hey, I'm going to do these guys. Like, but if you got this guy, I could get a software guy, right? So it's like, because I'm using you, and like it's such a close partnership. Whereas like, hey, you need a guy, an electrical engineer, to do stuff for Alchemy for other stuff, but maybe also slice a few hours to work on CZAR stuff.
Sure. And
then I don't have to go. There's not like this duplication of effort.
Yeah, but also,
talent.
hey, Mush, you need a software guy,
right?
But not a full-time one.
Right.
So fractionally, he can work with you. So. That's a great partnership.
Yeah.
And so my question is, as you were going around, you were looking for these potential manufacturing partners. What were some of the things you were seeing that was disqualifying them that qualified Mush?
There was a lot of like non-high tech, kind of backwards high, ape fingers touch into the manufacturing process. Like a lot of this is. If you're having a person, touch everything in your board to put it all together, to put your system together, you're probably doing something wrong, right? So like there needs to be this, we can solve it in automation. There's a few other ways to do it, but just a lot of it was, one of the major disqualifiers were just like outdated manufacturing techniques and equipment, right? Like we made a thing for 40 years and we're going to still do that,
right? So just a perceived inability to grow into new ways to do things.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and I think more importantly, because that's a solvable problem, more importantly to that, and what Mush is like one of the best I've ever met in the world at this, was this like inability or this lack of desire to collaborate and like really get close with someone and like get into bed with them. And so, there was like this weird standoffishness and like it was all transactional and it was all this weirdness, right? Because Alchemy is relatively new as well, right? Like they don't have all of the answers right now today. I would bet my career that Mush of any person alive will figure that out.
Sure.
And to grow that, right? But but part of this is like you really need that collaboration to start off with. Because then you can build something far more interesting together if there is that close collaboration from right out the rip. And there was just like this inability that I found of like people to do like human to human close collaboration. It was very like weird, whether it's like corporate-y or just like awkward-y. It was just like, oh, you guys are doing something we've never done before. Oh, that's going to be a lot of cost. And like the abacus comes out and the bean counting starts. It's just like, what, like,
right.
Do you are you not interested in that? Like, do you see this as the future or not? And then like the answer to that is like a lot of times was no. And so like there was always this angle or weirdness. Look, there was at the point where I'm sure there were hundreds of manufacturers that could have done it great with us, right?
Sure.
But we were viewing kind of time of the essence, and then we made the decision that we were going to do this in house. Right around the time where I first got introduced to Mush, and then it was pretty apparent pretty soon that all of the value that he and his team could help us with, and like looking back on it now, I couldn't have designed a better partner.
That's awesome.
Than him and them.
That's awesome. And so what's next for CZAR? Where are you guys now and what's going on?
Yeah, so things are kind of crazy. Things are really, really picking up. So we've got
and first of all, I don't think we covered this. CZAR is actually an acronym.
Yeah, it's Carbon Zero Advanced Research. So that's part Army brainwashing and love for acronyms, part terrible spelling. You can't. For me, it's like, well, carbon zero, you can't spell a whole lot of things with CZ. So, and it's also like a very like neat 4-letter word. And so
you don't hear it a lot.
And you don't hear it a lot. But there's also like a double meaning to it, right? Which is, you don't hear it a lot, I think, in part because it's like a boss.
It's also sort of negative in connotation a lot of times.
Yeah, exactly. And for us, it was like, no, somebody needs to take charge of this.
Right.
You need to whether you're talking about an Afghan czar or like a drug czar, like in the government, right? When the term czar is used, it's just like a boss. It's like This shit is like a super complicated problem, and we just need to put someone in charge to figure it out. Like just figure it out. Yeah. Like you're the guy that I'm going to give you this ball of nonsense and chaos, and you figure it out.
You're now a czar.
You're the czar for this thing. And then that's us, right? Like
right.
Okay. Like energy is such a ball of catastrophe, and when you're talking about all the things that we've talked about before, very complicated and technical. It's like, my brain hurts. Let somebody else do it. It's like, no, like we got you.
We'll do it.
We'll do it. Yeah. We'll do it, and we'll do it in America. And so, for us, like what's like right around the corner, we've got demos kicking off. So we'll go live for the first time, starting in Q4 and rolling through Q1 in 7 states.
Nice.
So we've got pilots planned with a whole bunch of different great partners all across the country. And then Mush is pushing to bring me to Houston pretty hard. That's not, especially after this trip, it's becoming less and less of a hard sell. Right? Yeah. Like for me, like as an outsider, right? Houston initially was like, if someone built Cleveland in the Congo, right? Like there's this concrete jungle and it's humid as hell.
It's the hottest place.
And it's like, why would anyone voluntarily live there?
I got to tell you, man, a couple weeks ago, I was up in Pennsylvania, like the Pittsburgh area.
Sure.
And in the middle of the week, me and the manager of the facility went fishing in the Appalachian Mountains.
Yeah.
And it was awesome.
Yeah.
I've done that trip a couple of times. It's a blast. But one of the guys that is at the shop there, the Wildcat shop there, he goes, it's going to be hot up there. And I go, yeah? What's that mean? And he was like, well, it's probably going to be like 85, 87 degrees. Yeah. And I go, okay.
Yeah.
I said, you know where I live, right? And I live in Houston. And he goes, yeah, but we'll get 70% humidity up there. And I said, yeah, we'll get that too. Yeah. And it's 102.
Right. And
then he goes, oh, well, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hot on a scale a lot of people can't even appreciate. I told someone the other night, we'll go fishing sometimes in the middle of the summer, the sun's down.
Sure.
Night fishing,
sure.
It's 96 degrees still.
Yeah, it's insane. And so I like my conversion experience happened very rapidly, right? So it was very like negative to start off with, humid concrete jungle, sprawling city, gross.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of things happened, right? So Alchemy was the first one to be like, okay, you need to look at Houston. Now you have a reason to go there and like check it out. And then like all these things started to happen. So one of the first things was like, Like there are a lot of humans that live here.
Yep.
Like, I think like fourth most populated city in the country. Number one in
really
Texas.
Capable humans.
Well, and that was the second domino. So it was like one, that's really interesting. Second domino to fall, and this was hard to hear as a shameless Midwesterner, but it's the number one city for manufacturing in the country, both in terms of humans employed and number of manufacturing entities registered, right? So it's like, it's the number one city in America for manufacturing. All right, that's interesting. Then you look at it is the energy capital of America and arguably the world. And so what does that mean? Again, like if you're kind of in this for ideological reasons, it's all of the evil oil and natural gas people live here in their mansions and whatever. Yeah, right. I look at it much, much differently. And I look at it as, the people who know how to run
energy companies,
everything are here.
Yeah.
Maybe those are good people to talk to.
It's good people to know.
Maybe those are good people to know. You mean the people that are in charge of all energy in America are
and
here?
A lot of the world.
And most of the world, they're here?
That's right.
Okay. That seems like you should do the opposite of running away. You should be running towards that location.
Correct.
And then I brought the family out here last time I was out here, and we went to Galveston, and like all of these things started to come together, and meeting with a lot of the folks here. Again, like the economic development team in Houston is just badass. Like what Houston's been able to do and pivot. I think timing is also huge.
Sure.
Talking to some of these, longer time Houston residents, like this whole awakening from like both a startup and an energy transition thing is like really recent, right? Yeah. It's like last 2 or 3 years recent. And the interesting, I might be like misunderstanding some of the stories that were told to me over the last, 24 hours. But, a lot of folks think that the trigger for that was being passed up, like not making the top 20 for Amazon's second headquarters. Right, so here you have this huge city with like number one in manufacturing, this badass, awesome port.
Right.
Like in my mind, like knowing this now, energy capital of the world, knowing like this is the perfect city for Amazon's second headquarters.
Yeah, and they didn't even make the top 20.
Didn't even make the top 20. And so my understanding of what happens was they're like, rather than bitch like a lot of other cities did, Houston, very Texas fashion, got together and closed a door and said, hey, how did this happen?
Cool story, bro.
Yeah.
Watch this.
What went wrong, and did like a very sober, after action review. And then again, in, kind of classic Texan fashion, put money where mouth is, and then just started to do a bunch of cool shit. So like, we're in a building that was kind of a sketchy grocery store at one point. There was a homeless encampment in the parking lot. There was a homeless encampment where the Ion building is across the street. Literally, like a few years ago, like this was the reality. Right?
Sure, yeah, this is recent history.
And the other thing I think it was like a huge, so look, there was this huge, like floodgates opened up from like a cool techie startup perspective ecosystem kind of emerged overnight. And I think another huge kind of element was like a cultural shift. And this is like, again, like a lot of lessons learned from last night in this event that I was at, but was also like all of the OG energy folks are like, we're about the transition. Yeah. Right. And like that was a huge cultural shift, but also like that's so meaningful because, in Ohio right now, I'm in which is a pretty conservative state, coal, fracking.
There's some oil and gas industry up there, mainly natural gas.
Yeah. And so you take that, there was this mayor in a very small town that I won't name that said that he thought that the wind turbines were fake, that they pulled energy from the grid to move, right?
Oh.
Right? Like to actually move, right? Like, okay. So that's where I live. And then I would fly out to LA and get like, Hey,
that guy's an elected official, huh?
Yeah, he's an elected official. And I don't even know if he's the worst one that I've talked to, right?
That's awesome.
And so then I get on a plane, and within hours, I'm in, LA.
Sure.
And then you've got like the complete opposite end of the spectrum, right? You've got, firebomb throwing hippies that'll stab you in the face for using plastic bags.
Yeah.
Right. So like a cultural whiplash, right?
Right.
And because of Nelson, like we've got a lot of great roots in MIT and Boston in general with the state of Massachusetts. We won grant money with them. Like they're an awesome partner. But that meant that like we've got experience on the East Coast, the Midwest, and the West Coast.
Right.
And so like for me, like that's good enough. And then I found the third coast.
Yeah.
And it was like this unbelievably refreshing realization to talk to like professionals.
Yeah.
Right. Like not whack jobs and on either end.
Correct.
And just being like,
let's just figure out how to make this work, man.
Let's just do it.
Yep.
We do it all now. We understand that we're in the middle of a transition and we have no intention of losing.
Right.
So
we like to win. We understand how to win, and we understand how to win at scale.
That's exactly right. And like that, like it's like, I mean, it sounds so obvious when you say it like that, but like I think the truly the experience in the country right now is you're like a weird like stuck in the past. And again, it's like it's not necessarily even about like climate denial. It's just like this old way of doing things is the only way to do things, and then that often bumps up against the old ways are evil, and like don't do anything like you used to. And like then there's this refreshing middle ground. It's not even middle ground. It's just like the right answer. It's not like between two extremes. It's like this other option, which is here.
I'm amazed at how many times people like the belief that you can get rid of hydrocarbons completely. Let's just the over 50% of hydrocarbons used for gasoline and that kind of stuff. Sure. But literally everything else has hydrocarbons in it.
Everything.
Yeah, from
medicine,
pharmaceuticals to
right.
Yeah, and I don't think people quite understand that.
Right.
And that
certainly.
Number one, you're never getting rid of it completely. You can't.
Well, you don't want to.
No,
right? It's like,
you can't.
It's like you can't. You don't want to. And from my perspective, it's very pragmatic. It's like, okay, should we be taking these things that have been smushed underground for millions of years and burning them off in a second to move wheels forward? Probably not. Maybe in some cases, but like there's a lot of.
I do sincerely hope
Yeah.
that we keep some muscle cars around, like new Corvettes and stuff are not electric.
I know so many people who fall into that category. I fall into this hyper weird category, which is like, my ideal vehicle is a 1967 Mustang Fastback that's electric, right? Because it's like the not, and I know a lot of people are just like,
but we're going to go ahead and end on that, I think. I think we're done here.
But the look of that, the classic look with the performance of like,
oh, you can't match the performance of a Tesla. Those things are unreal.
I mean, it's immediate. And there's also a lot of things that, again, that I don't think are talked about enough. You lose about 70% of the energy that you use in an ICE vehicle to like not cool things like heat.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So it's like,
you say ICE vehicle. What do you mean?
Internal combustion engine vehicle.
Yeah, but also on the flip side, with an electric engine or an electric motor, I guess it would be, you lose a tremendous amount of efficiency to cold from battery storage.
Yeah, there is so there is some degradation to range, but I think from and that problem is getting solved.
But you're speaking of a different efficiency, like to actually move the vessel forward.
The vehicle, right, exactly. And so, because like as it turns out, moving meat in metal and time and space is like a really energy intensive process, right?
Correct.
And so, I think it would even piss more people off if they realized that 70 cents of every dollar that they spend on gasoline is not moving the car. Like that's a big number.
Probably sitting in traffic. Really, that is one downside to major cities like this. But no, you're right, and that energy transition is gonna. I do see an absolute need for the energy transition.
Yeah.
Being old school oil and gas,
sure.
I have a natural whatever.
Yeah, right.
Hippies.
Yeah.
But at the same time, man, Teslas are cool,
yeah.
and as long as they continue to make these vehicles that are, increasing the range on them and everything, you watch these commercials and they're like 300-mile range. I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
So you drive to Dallas, and then how long does it take to charge that back up, right? Before you can go again. That's a problem that's got to get solved. How quickly you can get back on the road, because now it takes me 5 minutes to fill my truck up, and I'm back on the road, right?
Sure.
And my truck holds 27 gallons of fuel. It goes a long way, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I still sincerely hope that we have some loud, fast cars on the road.
Well, I'll make sure that the electric Mustang that I have will come with just like speakers to give you your loudness.
It's so weak, man.
Yeah, I know.
It's so weak.
I love this. I love this. The smell of inefficiency. I think that's your position. The more inefficiency I can hear in the engine, the happier I am.
So when you say it that way, it sounds awful, but I like the smell of burning fuel. And so
which I interpret as inefficiency.
But man, it sounds like you guys are just. First of all, it sounds like you got in on it early. You saw it coming.
Yeah, weirdly early, right? So like another like kind of broader entrepreneurial message is. We kind of we lucked out, right? Very rare. It's very rare that any team or any company sees something, can burn slow for years, and then the market's not like past them. Like a lot of times, it's like, here's an opportunity. Are you ready? Are you not? Nope. Okay, bye. Like there it's gone. Right. So like we made. I can't stress enough how many bets we made across multiple different technologies that like this thing was going to come together. And it happened to all come together at the right time. Like it wasn't 10 years from now. It wasn't 10 years ago. Like it was right now. And so, like all of the stars are aligning, I think, from every vantage point, social, technical, political. Economic. Yeah. Literally all of the stars are aligning right now. So yeah, like we're really excited. I think that makes a lot of sense to do what we're doing here, right? Like this is, again, like in a lot of these conversations I had, just like awesome folks from, just like met like a great guy from Halliburton last night, Scott, and we were just talking about like, it's so refreshing to have OG energy people. I think it's like what is truly needed in the transition is you pair old wise organizations with new scrappy piratey organizations, and they can kind of balance out some of that energy, no pun intended, and then also like it kind of injects some new ways of doing things in youth into older organizations.
I think that's critical, and one of the things that has always served me well is I'm always up for a new idea.
Sure.
And whether I'll agree with it or not, I want to hear it and learn about it and that kind of stuff. And I think that's the only way in any endeavor that we actually move forward. So it is good to hear that. And I've seen that too in oil and gas, these huge like frac fleets, these giant, fleets of trucks trying to go to electric and these pumps go to electric and, those types of things. And the infrastructure is not there to support them yet.
Sure.
But you guys are going to solve that problem at CZAR.
Yeah. Like for us, it's, so like there's a bunch of other like philosophical things that we're kind of like our foundation is in. And one of them is like, okay, the solution should be to wherever you can is to shorten the distance from the point at which energy is generated to the point at which it's consumed. Because again, like a lot of the work we did on the grid side was even if you could click your heels together 3 times and solve fusion power or make it all renewable from a generation perspective, the real issue a lot of the times is in the transmission, right? Millions of miles of transmission lines all across the country, and any foot of which, a squirrel, a tree, a drunk driver, a whatever can knock out, right? And not like catastrophically knock out necessarily, but
it's catastrophic for the people that don't have power at that moment.
That's right. And especially in like another lesson learned, and Mush was very instrumental in this, is like there are so many things that are happening here in Houston that are like super, like you need 100% certainty of uptime, and even like minutes of downtime when you're talking about semiconductor manufacturing or like whatever. Like you'll throw everything out of whack. Like you need a 100% guarantee of always of energy, right? And so for us, it's like you don't have to make this weird all or nothing thing. For us, it's how do you generate your own? It's like it's truly like an energy resiliency, energy security play. It's like how do you generate if the grid shits the bed? How do you make sure first, this first commercial product, it's, CNI first, probably or mid next year, we'll do a residential spinoff. So how do you, first for your business and then for your home, how do you generate your own electricity? I mean, it's a very Texan idea. How do you generate your own, in addition to like Texas having its own grid, right? Like if that shits the bed, how do you generate your own electricity? How do you store it? And how do you also use those things to, handle your transportation if it's an electric vehicle? if something bad happens, right? And it's like like that is real energy independence. Like that is real personal organizational independence is when you say, hey, we'll use the grid when it makes sense to use the grid, and then we won't when it doesn't. And like being able organically, to generate your own power, to store it, to use it when you want it across multiple different forms, right? Solar, wind, grid, battery, flywheel. I mean, there's so many. Part of this, me being the dumbest person in all of these rooms is because we physically connect to all of these things. I have to know not just a little, but a lot about all of these different sectors. So I got to go deep in every, what is involved in a solar installation and what does that look like from a panel size to a racking to inverters to all of that. And then, what is that on the wind side? And then you talk about the Monsters Inc. door opening. That's like on the energy storage side. That is lithium ion. That is alternative chemistries like rechargeable alkaline, like zinc based. That's second life batteries. That's hydrogen. That's flywheel. Like you could be lost all day long, and that's just like one thing. And you also have to know about the grid. And you also have to know about electric vehicles. And so like I have a front row seat to all of these things, which is what gives me not only like hope for the future, but like a legit excitement for the future.
Right.
Because it's like, somebody might be, not know anything about any of those, or just be nibbling on one of those things. And so like, just as a straight up result of what we're doing at the middle of all of those things, a lot of my time is spent going around and learning as much as I can about everything that feeds us to be able to like feed everyone else better. And that's been awesome because it's going to take a full court press. The oil and natural gas isn't going anywhere.
No.
But at the same time, grid reliability and adding distributed energy capacity, renewable energy capacity, being able to store it and charge and recharge, discharge, whether it's a vehicle or a stationary battery, when it makes the most economic sense to do so, that's what's needed.
Yeah, and make that switch from grid to your own independent on-site thing seamless, uninterrupted.
Right.
Is going to be critical.
Seamless, uninterrupted, cost-effective,
right.
Fast to install. Like all of these problems are the problems that we're getting after. Because I don't think it's appropriate to like shame people for not being able to suddenly, generate and store their own electricity, and then like the practical application of deploying these solutions is a nightmare.
Right.
Like you need 5 electrical engineers and 3 electricians to put something in.
Yeah.
Like that's not acceptable either,
no.
right? So
you got to be able to have a technician or a team of technicians be able to do it on the ground.
Got to be a CZAR.
A CZAR. Look at you. We're called with the callback. It's exciting to listen to something that's new.
Yeah.
And so many times here you feel like, man, everything's been invented.
Sure.
But it's really cool to hear what you guys are doing and hear that about these technologies that are seemingly new, but
sure.
you guys have been thinking about for quite some
sure.
time. So, man, I can't wait to when you move to Texas, continue the conversations with you, and when you do get down here, man, let me know, and my wife and I will take you and your wife out. And we'll
That'd
have a
be
good
awesome.
time. But thanks so much, man, Tony, for being a part of this and for, like I said, coming from Ohio to Texas to do my podcast. So,
I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, absolutely,
Thanks
man.
so much.
Thanks again, and man, I look forward to hearing how you guys get going.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Awesome, man.
Thanks, bud.
Thanks, bud.